Joseph Susanka, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Why are some movies so bad?
Uh, oh, there's probably almost as many reasons movies are bad as there are the reasons movies are good, I suppose. But
I
so,
guess I have in the last 10 years, the last 10 years, this question's been rolling around my mind because it's always seemed to me that we've been making movies for 100 years. We do know what works, right? Like not it's not as if movies don't get tested against the audience. We know how to make $1 million in the studio become $10 million in the box office, or multiply that by 100 if you want to,
mhm.
right? 100 million becomes a billion. We know how to do it, and yet so many movies are so bad. What's going on?
Well, I guess it seems to me there are a couple things there. The first one, I guess, would be what you mean when you say that they're bad, right? So I think in some ways, some of the most successful movies of the last 20 years, I think, are terrible. Mostly they're done by James Cameron, and they make tremendous amount of money, right? Um, I think that
What did he make?
so he made
He made
he
Avatar.
made the Avatar,
Oh, he made Avatar.
which I
Oh,
think are pretty
yeah.
terrible. Well, I mean, they're beautiful to look at.
Mm,
I remember the first Avatar movie. There's the sequence at night with all the kind of luminescent plants,
mm-hmm,
which is
mm-hmm,
fabulous. It's beautiful to look at, right?
mm-hmm.
But the story is uh,
Pocahontas.
it's kind of the extreme white savior story, right? Except instead of the white man saving the natives, the white man becomes an alien somehow at the end, right?
Mm.
But it's about uh, capitalists destroying everything, and the script is, I think, terrible, right? So that would be the first thing. Would be, well, sometimes bad movies make a lot of money,
Mm, mm.
but I guess the other thing would be what you're trying to make, right? So
Mm.
I think often studios have gotten very good at knowing what will make them money,
Okay.
right? Uh, it's not always a good movie. In fact, it's if I think about movies in the recent past that have made a lot of money, it's kind of rarely a good movie. But they're not. I think in some cases they're not trying to make a good. They're trying to make a movie that makes them a lot of money.
Ah,
And one of the ways that they know they can make a lot of money is if they're using a story which is uh, connected to something people already liked, right? So there's not a lot of original, kind of wildly imaginative movies being made, but there are about 500 Marvel movies being made, right? And those make a lot of money.
uh-huh.
But for studios, it's easy for them to say, I'll spend $200 million on this movie because I know $500 million worth of people will come see it.
Mm.
But that's not the same thing as being good, right? In fact, I think most of the movies that I've enjoyed in the recent past, I don't think make a lot of money.
Mm. I guess even recent Marvel movies, I, in the last, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years, they've made a bunch of movies that have not made as much at the box office as perhaps was projected,
Mhm.
but they probably still made a profit. Yeah.
I think so. Or they'll stop making them
Or they'll stop
at some
making them,
point. Yeah,
which
which would be
it,
fine with me actually if we could stop making Marvel movies. I think I think I lost a fair bit of interest in Marvel movies. I think probably after the first Avenger movie.
mm,
After that, they started to feel uh, very much the same to me.
mm-hmm.
I liked Ant-Man because it felt like a heist movie,
Ah,
so it felt different than the
heist
other
movie
stuff they
with
were making,
superheroes.
right?
No.
Or at least really little people.
I hope they're a superhero.
But yeah, so I guess one of my I one of my points would I guess would be I think a lot of people aren't trying to make movies that are good. They're not,
Mm,
probably not trying to make movies that are bad either,
mm,
right? But what they're trying to do is to make a movie which corresponds to a particular formula
okay.
that will make them money, right?
Uh-huh.
I think often what you'll have, again, the kind of the Marvel movies kind of show this, right? Which is you'll have directors or Star Wars, right? You have directors that make little movies
Mm-hmm.
that people are really surprised by and excited about.
Mm.
And then they say, hey, so is it Colin Trevorrow, the fellow that made Safety Not Guaranteed?
Yes.
I saw that, right? Really interesting movie.
Yeah.
They're like, you know what you should make? Jurassic Park.
Yep.
And you're like, I'm not quite sure how we got from here to here. And often we don't, right? Somebody who's good at a little thing,
Mm.
there's no particular reason to think they'll be good at a studio thing, right? And so for a little while, I think Marvel was doing that. They were finding somewhere. The gal that did Nomadland, who then they said should make The Immortals. I don't know if you saw The Immortals.
Immortals. I didn't
That
see it.
was a bad movie.
Ah.
Yeah, that was a bad movie.
Okay. Nomadland. Yeah.
So I guess one the question would be also would apply to literature, I guess, too. Like, why do people write so many bad books? There are a lot of bad books,
Mm.
but it's because they're not necessarily trying to write a good book. They're trying to write a popular book.
They're trying to write
Trying to write something that will be successful,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think anytime you do that, you're thinking more of movies as a product in a way.
Sure.
Right. So I tend to think of movies as art, which is well made or not well made. I tend to think that it's helpful to think of movies as art. It's less helpful to think of movies as entertainment. I
Ah.
think good art is entertaining often.
Yep.
But the opposite doesn't have to be true at all. When something is entertaining, it's not artful.
Ah.
Right. So maybe not.
Like Napoleon Dynamite.
That has a
Where's that
cartoon.
art?
That has an artistic quality the way a cartoon has an artistic
So
quality. No.
Napoleon Dynamite is the first time I watched it. The term that I would use to refer to it came to pass later in time. So there's a definite vibe to Napoleon Dynamite. It perfectly captures something.
Mm.
I'm not quite sure that it would occur to me to try to capture that thing,
Mm.
but it does, right? Yeah. Yeah, but I guess I don't think Napoleon Dynamite is I don't think it's a good movie.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it's a bad movie.
Mm.
I think it's an odd movie.
It's like one of those very, very fun, odd movies that you watch with your friends just to
I
laugh
mean, it's
at.
it's imminently quotable, right?
Yeah.
You quote it forever.
Sure.
Or I have in my mind that the scene where the guy shoots the cow with all the kids in the school bus.
Oh.
That moment.
I vaguely. No.
I'm twisted that way, but yeah. So I guess Napoleon Dynamite feels like it's. I guess I would say that Napoleon Dynamite seems to me to be a thing that someone wanted to make in a particular way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they weren't necessarily. I would be surprised if the people making that movie thought this is going to make millions of dollars.
Mm.
I doubt that was the thing that was driving them. I guess I don't know that for sure, but because it's so kind of idiosyncratic,
Mm.
I don't. It feels like go back to the Marvel movies, right? Kind of what happens there is you flatten out all the idiosyncrasies, right? You make it. They just feel paint by number to me.
Mm.
Like I know what's going to happen. It doesn't mean that you can't. There's still moments that can be moving or something, right? But there's something about them that feels formulaic,
Sure.
right? Which I think points to the thing we were talking about a moment ago, right? Which is, I think those movies are made to make money. They're not made to be good or bad necessarily.
Mm.
They're made to make money.
I mean, is it in a way that like
road, though.
McDonald's doesn't really care whether its burger is good or bad as long as people buy it,
People buy it.
right?
Yeah,
Like
we do that.
they wouldn't be upset if it turned out that their burger was great,
Sure.
but that's not the point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that's why for those of us who are eating the hamburgers or watching the movies, right? That's why somebody like Christopher Nolan, for example, is exciting. Like, whoa, okay, so I want that to make money so that there are more of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels much more interesting. Right?
Yeah.
But as long as people keep going to see the Marvel movies,
Mm.
they'll make some of those, right? Or a lot of them, because it's an expensive proposition. And most studios are not going to be comfortable saying, here's $200 million to make a very weird thing that people might like or might not like. Right.
Mhm.
So what they want to do, if they're going to give you $200 million, they want to know that they're going to make $600 million, because otherwise, why are they going to give you $200 million? Right.
Mm.
And I think, again, that kind of,
They don't want to create a museum piece that then, right.
right, it moves you down the path where you say, oh, the point of this whole process is to make something which is economically successful.
Okay.
That doesn't have to be artistically successful at all, right? And in
Mhm.
fact, directors, I think, who are kind of willing to take more risks or something will often end up something which is not particularly economically successful, like Star Wars 8, right?
Yeah.
So Ryan Johnson, who comes from a much more kind of independent film background. Have you guys seen Brick? Brick.
No, but I've heard that I have to, yeah,
Brick's
I've
a
heard
great
it's excellent.
Yep. So that was his first movie, I think.
Hmm.
And he made Brothers Bloom, and he made Looper.
Hmm.
And then he made Star Wars 8. And I think what he did in Star Wars 8 is he kind of wanted to do something. He had a particular vision and he pursued it,
Hmm.
but it was in some ways the wrong kind of risk for that crowd. The Star Wars crowd is not looking for somebody who's turning the Jedi mythology on its head. That's not what they're looking for.
Right.
So I think you end up with Disney saying, oh, I guess that's not the kind of risk we want to take. We actually want the J.J. Abrams kind of director who's just making really big commercials about Star Wars over and over and over and over again. The
Same thing he did for Star Trek
Yes, exactly. Right. Although I think he always wanted Star Wars. Star Trek he did, I think, to get him to
as an audition.
But
yeah.
So Star Wars 7. What's that called again? I don't remember.
Force Awakens.
Force Awakens. I enjoyed the first hour. I enjoyed the first, and then
the trailer is one of the best things I had ever seen.
Trailer got everyone so excited.
And after that, you're like, wait, this is a really long. Now this is just a really long trailer.
Ah,
The movie felt like a long trailer.
okay.
So there's a certain. JJ is an interesting case, right? Because I think he really loves things. He really loves the Star Wars movies. He really loves making, movies in his backyard with Super 8 cameras. He really loves those things. And I don't know that he really loves Spielberg.
Hmm.
I don't know that he can kind of make his own thing. Mostly he's making an homage to something that he loves, which I mean, cool. He really loves things, but it feels like there's not really the ability to veer away from the thing is that he's loving to come up with something else.
Hmm.
But so I end up feeling like Ryan Johnson. For me, I think of the three, what are those called? Sequels, I guess. The numbering is very confusing to me at this point.
Ah,
The only one of those I think that interests me is
number 8.
well, so I think number 8 it interests me kind of abstractly because
Hmm.
I think he was trying to do something different,
Hmm.
and I like that as opposed to 7 or 9. I don't know that it succeeds particularly.
Hmm.
I think the stuff on the planet with the red sand or so, like there's some very striking visual things,
Hmm.
but mostly it feels too long and just loud and all those things, right?
And dumb.
Oh, I don't know that it feels.
I think that I
don't think it feels more dumb to me than 7 or 9.
Oh, okay.
7 actually is just A New Hope. Again, it's like almost beat for beat.
Hmm.
It's the same story,
Yeah.
except with a bigger Death Star. So we'll call it what do we call it?
Star Killer Base.
Yeah, I mean, but it's the same movie. Right?
Yeah.
At least 8's not the same movie. I don't know that it succeeds particularly.
Hmm.
But I think it's doing something more interesting than 7 or 9,
Hmm.
which is 7 or 9 just feel like attempts to kind of prolong a certain generation's fascination with a certain story,
Hmm.
which means you can't step on anybody's toes.
Hmm.
Ryan Johnson stepped on a bunch of people's toes, so nobody liked it, right? But I think for me, the only one that really, for me that really is interesting is Rogue One.
Yeah, that was a great one.
And that's because Rogue One is not trying to pay homage to anything. It's actually telling its own story. There's a very, very little sliver of Star Wars that they're kind of expanding on, right?
Yep.
And we don't have anything that corresponds to that, so it doesn't have to do violence to anything. Kind of tell its own story, right? So that's the only one to me that's really interesting. Much more likely, you're going to get something like Solo, which I thought was terrible, right? Where you're trying to squeeze. I don't know. You're kind of retcon something that's not worth retconning. Like, I don't know. What we should do is we should take the character that everybody cares about. But there's two characters everybody cares about in Star Wars: Han Solo and Darth Vader. And all the stuff around Star Wars has basically destroyed both of those characters, especially Darth Vader. Like, so ultimate villain. I do not need 3 movies to show me that was actually just a whiny little kid and we should do that for him. Like, what's the point of that? He just kind of springs forth just evil. He's basically the devil, right? When he first shows up, he's amazing and he just drives everything in those 3 movies. And then to have him be redeemed at the end, that's cool, right? Okay, fine. Even he is safe, right? But all the stuff in the prequels just makes him a whiny brat, right? A little whiny brat and then a big whiny brat. But he's just, so then all of a sudden he's not scary anymore the same way, right? And I think they did the same thing with Han Solo, right? They're like, oh, he's kind of the lovable rogue, right? And if you take Solo, they're trying to make him sympathetic and less of a rogue. And what it makes you end up actually thinking is, well, how did he become a rogue again? Because you get to the end of Solo and he seems like a good guy. So what happened that now he's a rogue? Like, just in that little window between.
They have to sort of repeat. Yeah, they try to have to repeat the arc. They have to like go find the arc that he accomplished in the original movies, and they go, "Oh, that was a really cool arc. People really got invested in that arc. So let's take that arc and make it happen beforehand."
Which maybe is fine, but use a different character for it.
Ah,
Because you can't have those characters going through those same arcs over and over and over again. Otherwise, you're like,
what's the point?
he's a jerk. Like, he didn't learn anything. Why is he back in the same space that he started in?
Right.
But I don't know. But I do think in some ways the Star Wars things are the same as what you're talking about, right? I think those movies are made to appeal to a particular audience and to be financially successful. They're not made to be good, right? We're not to be good storytelling, not to be.
But I mean, is there not awareness in studios that good storytelling does produce excitement, right? I mean, is that part lost to our nation's storytellers?
Well, I don't know about that. I guess it seems to me. I do think I'll come back to this thing, kind of the distinction between art and entertainment, right?
Okay.
I think a lot of people are going to the theater to be entertained.
Okay.
They want, well, I don't know if it's a Marvel movie, maybe 3 hours worth. If it's a regular movie, maybe 2 hours. Like, they want to be. It seems to me there is kind of an escapism to it, right? They want to sit and be entertained by something for a couple of hours. It's like reading a New York Times. My mother-in-law calls them ... books, right? It's just like a book that doesn't really mean anything. You just kind of read this book. CJ Box. Like, there's millions of those. Like, you go through millions of them. I like them, but they're not up to anything, right? They're just meant to be entertaining.
Like a John Grisham novel.
It's not a bad thing, right? But I think a lot of people, if they go to a theater, that's kind of what they're looking for, right?
Oh,
so I think it's helpful. So when I have these conversations, like with college kids, for example, I'm like, okay, so I think it's an extraordinary medium. I think it's a combination of so many mediums, right? So you kind of have the literary script, you have extraordinary visual ability. You usually have music is very powerful usually, and that's acting. So you're kind of taking stage and music and literature and art, and you're kind of putting all these things together, right?
Yeah.
I think it's an incredible medium that way.
Yeah.
With all of these individual things, we think of them as kind of worthy of serious examination, and we think of them as art, right? I think it's helpful for us to think about movies that way too, right? let's think about the medium this way. If you're a great director, you're making very particular decisions about very particular things you're trying to do in order to tell a very particular story, right?
Mhm.
It's like a great piece of literature. You can look at it and see that, right? And I think that if what we're looking for, but you would probably read a book uh, and have at least the potentially think, I don't know if this is going to be entertaining, but it's going to be thoughtful. It's going to make me think about things. It's going to move me. I'm going to end up in some ways better off than I was, but I'm not necessarily reading it because it's going to be, I don't know, Brothers K. Like, I'm not going to read that book because I'm going to whip through it. I mean, even reading Russian, it just takes me a long time anyway, because I have to try to figure out who's this person. Like, this person has like 5 different names. Who are we talking about here? But like, you're not reading it. If you sit down with a book like that,
Yeah.
you're not reading it thinking, I can pick the John Grisham up or Dostoevsky. Either one, it's going to be basically the same thing, right? You're not thinking.
No.
You're thinking of one of them as a distinctly different kind of thing than the other, right? And so I think for the studios, at least, and for a lot of people going to the theaters, they are thinking of movies as entertainment, as a way to kind of pass the time
Huh.
and to be amused, right? And to be, in some ways, passive, right? You're just going to watch something. And then so you don't have to do anything. You don't have to think. You don't have to, you probably are going to be eating at the same time or whatever. Like, you don't have to do anything. It's not a communicative, it's not a conversation, right?
Right.
And so what I think is helpful is to think of movies as a conversation, the way you would think of literature as a conversation, or a painting. Like, the artist is trying to represent something and wants the audience to engage with the thing that he has done.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some ways, audiences or studios, because they're reacting to the audiences,
Mm-hmm.
are not trying to do that. They're trying to get people to sit down and be kind of passive in a way, right? And so
Trying to get them to spend $11 and not regret it.
Right. Yeah, and I guess if we were to move, I think, towards from audiences that are looking to be entertained towards audiences that are starting to think of movies as as a conversation that they're kind of engaging in, or something to be experienced, not just passively, but kind of to be engaged with.
Mm-hmm.
Then my guess would be that the balance between things we would talk about as being good or bad would kind of shift too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because those kinds of things aren't safe, right? It's like the Aslan's not a tame lion thing, right? You're not to do the thing that the studios are trying to do is to find something that fits in the sweet spot for the largest amount of people, which is not how you end up with something interesting. It's how you end up with something safe, right? And I think that's what you see with stuff like Marvel.
Right.
You see stuff which is safe, right?
You kind of know what you're going. You know what you're going in for, right? Whereas if you had never seen Van Gogh, right, and then you saw a Van Gogh painting, if you were serious about the study of painting, you would say, "Whoa, this is different.
Yeah.
I don't know if I like it.
Yep.
In fact, I see a lot that I might really dislike."
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's why, for me, I think the movies I think of that have stuck with me the most are often tend to be the movies that make me think the most, that keep coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about that thing again, right?
What's a good example of that?
Rarely movies where I get to the end and think, yeah, I lived happily ever after. Like, I like some of those too, but that's actually not often what
Right.
they are. Yeah.
Have you seen Winter's Bone?
Yes, it's been a while now.
It's been a while. That was
Hillbilly Noir. Yeah.
Hillbilly Noir. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good example of those kinds of things, right? So I just tend to, I think probably you too, when we talk about movies, like, you tend to gravitate towards those things. They're just, in some ways, I don't know if The things I liked about Winter's Bone, I think I didn't. I would use I don't know, Mud maybe as an example of hillbilly noir that I like better or something, right? But
That's McConaughey? Okay.
Jeff Nichols.
Okay. I've not seen it.
That's
Yeah.
very good.
Okay. I know I have
You
to.
would like that. The where you kind of get, and even I mean, a lot of those movies have kind of quasi happy ending, right? But you have to wade through a lot of darkness to get there, right?
Mhm.
Now just ending up in darkness all the time is not great either, right? It's one of the
And ultimately not profound, although someone might think
Sure.
I'm being really profound because everybody's dead.
I think that's one of the things for me that's so I tend to be well, kind of cinematically self-educated, right?
Sure.
Which is easier now than it used to be. You can watch a lot of stuff
Hmm.
and kind of educate. You just kind of learn about stuff yourself, right?
Sure.
But, I have never liked Scorsese as much as I think my fascination with movies would make people would expect. Same thing with Hitchcock. Like there are things that I like about them, or maybe even respect about them, but often Scorsese's movies are, I think, technically beautifully made movies about ugly things. And I rarely get
He
to
made Gangs of New York. He made The Departed. He made Wolf of Wall Street. And he's made a bunch. He's worked forever.
So New Hollywood, right? But
Right. He made Raging Bull.
Yep.
He's been working forever.
The Departed, I think, is a perfect example.
The
Right.
Departed. Okay.
So the last shot, we don't have to worry about spoilers or stuff.
We do not have to worry about spoilers. Yes.
So-
If you're listening right now, there will be spoilers in the movies we discuss.
So the last shot of The Departed
Hmm.
is, if I remember correctly, that rat running across the windowsill with the dome of
Boston's Capitol in the background. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The rat on the rail.
There is nothing subtle about that. First of all, Scorsese's not subtlety is not the thing that he does anyway. But I just remember getting to the end of that movie and thinking, so I guess the point of this movie is everything's corrupt. Everything's terrible. Right? First of all, I don't think that's true. So I struggle with how accurate I think it is, or how good a representation of reality it is, right? But also I just get to the end and think, okay, fine. Like I don't.
If it was true, why does it need to be so? So why do you need to be hammered over the head with it?
Sure, right.
But also, you don't think it's true.
Right. So I mean, I don't think everything's terrible.
Right.
I think stuff can be hard. I certainly think that.
Mhm.
Right? But I don't think everything's terrible. So I tend to like movies where I like them to be dark because I think a lot of the world is dark. But I like them to because I think it's kind of my, I don't know, my O'Connor-esque tendencies or something, right? She talks about that we're not attuned to what she calls the kind of the intrusions of grace, right? And she, in literary form, she's kind of highlighting those things by putting them in stark contrast with the darkness that she's talking about at the same time, right?
Okay.
So I tend to think of movies that way. So I find myself drawn to those, right? So I call it the kind of the brutality of grace, right? The idea that you kind of get to the end and you're like, oh man, I see the grace more clearly when it's against this thing, right? So you could tell, so for O'Connor, like her great sin was that she was railing against was sentimentality, right? So what she hates is the idea that everything's rose-colored glasses and sepia and like everything's great, right? She hated that because thinks that's not an accurate representation of reality, right? The flip side is not
this sort of
Scorsese. Everything's awful. The flip side is, thank goodness, even though there are no rose-colored glasses and the world has a lot of pain and suffering and evil in it, also God. Like that's like the kind of the ultimate intrusion of grace is the crucifixion, right? This thing is ugly and terrible and transformative and salvific kind of at the same time, right? So that's the kind of thing that's kind of the way I tend to think of the world. And so I like to think I'm drawn to movies that do that.
Okay.
So
Well-
so one of the ones you had mentioned about that we might talk about, right, was Calvary, right? So I think
Mm.
Calvary is a great example of that.
Yeah, I just rewatched it last night.
So powerful,
Yeah.
right? The end of that movie is incredibly ennobling, right?
Yeah.
And the kind of that moment where you're kind of expecting it to go one way and it doesn't go that way, right? Where he says I feel like there's too much talk about sin.
Mm.
And I expect, kind of in typical Hollywood form, the next thing that's going to come is not enough talk about love, right?
Right.
But that's not what he says.
Mm.
He says there's too much talk about sin and not enough about forgiveness, right?
Mhm.
And what happens at the end of that movie is his daughter forgives. Like the last thing you see on her face is forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a perfect example. You say, wow, that movie is very dark.
Yeah.
It's very hard, especially to get through the very beginning of that movie. Like just getting through the first 5 minutes is really hard.
Yeah.
But he's an extraordinary character and he does something incredibly sacrificial. And the feeling you have at the end is not there's a rat running across the Capitol building. It's
There's
even in the midst of all of this pain and suffering and ugliness, you still have the thing the kind of the intrusion of grace.
the
right?
intrusion of
Still is
grace.
there, right?
Yeah.
It's still there, even in the midst of all of this stuff.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I just rewatched it and holy cow, I had to rewind that very last scene with the priest. I had to rewind it and watch it again because it is just, yeah.
There's so much of
It's-
Flannery O'Connor in that, right?
Okay.
So, and I think
I-
McDonough has actually talked explicitly about being influenced by Flannery O'Connor.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Um,
So, okay. The
so-
director has said
Yeah,
Flannery is,
pretty sure that I read interviews where he talks about Flannery O'Connor, right? And I think the very last moment of Calvary, or not the last moment, kind of the kind of the climax of
Mhm.
Calvary is just is the best cinematic representation of A Good Man Is Hard to Find that I've seen, right? So even down to the grandmother in A Good Man Is Hard to Find, like he shoots her because she touches him,
Mhm.
right? She sees uh she sees herself, she sees her children in him, right? And she kind of touches him and then he shoots her immediately, right? That's the same thing that happens with the priest. And at the like that's the moment the moment the misfit kills the grandmother is when she sees him
as
as
not a misfit.
right?
Wow.
The moment that I can't remember the names of the characters inside Calvary now, but the moment
It's the priest is Father James.
the
yeah.
moment Gleason recognizes his failing was that he didn't see Chris O'Dowd's character as a human, right? And he in a way kind of apologizes for that, right?
When he says,
That's the moment.
when he read about the abuse of children as something sort of antiseptic and in the papers,
Yep.
something out there, other.
Right. And then, so it's in some ways, it's at the moment when he sees that man as the victim, that's the moment when he gets killed. Right. So it's
Mm.
kind of in a way like the grandmother. There was a man threatening him every day of his life, he would have been great. Right. So I feel like that's a great example of kind of the grace coming through the kind of shining through the darkness. And I think
Yeah.
that the contrast is much clearer in that context. Right. So there's I think the Japanese talk about, I think it's mostly an architectural thing, but they talk about right? The idea is negative space. So if you're building something architecturally,
Mm-hmm.
the negative space is an important part of what you're doing, right? So you're not thinking of it as space the same way you would be thinking of the beams or the structure itself, right? But the shape of the thing and not just the shape of the thing, but the being of the thing is in part because of the things that are not there, right?
Ah,
And so it seems to me that, for me at least, my movie theories is connected to that idea, like that things are clearer with contrast, right? I just want there to be a thing that it's in contrast with. Right? I'm not just interested in the blackness. I don't. Every now and then I'll watch a movie like The Departed and think, I don't think that's the way the world is. I think it's missing an important part about the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's very carefully and clearly and maybe even eloquently addressing the darkness in the world,
Yeah.
but without kind of a sense of what it's actually, what that darkness actually makes manifest, right?
Right.
Which is the grace part.
Right. Be like walking into a closet, closing the door behind you and saying, this house is really dark. Like, yes,
Right.
but you're in the closet. Like,
Right.
you're not wrong,
Yeah.
but you're also not taking in a universal view of
Right.
this.
It's too focused, right? In a
Right.
way, or too narrow.
Right.
But
No.
at the same time, when even talking about Scorsese, like I think what he's doing is art
Okay.
in a way that J.J. Abrams making another Star Wars movie is not. Right. So I disagree with him, but I think he's trying to have a conversation
Hmm.
with his audience in a way.
He's making an argument.
Right.
Whereas J.J. Abrams is making a Big Mac. Ugh.
Yeah, and I don't.
Is that the difference between the first 3 Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit movies? I mean, is that basically the difference?
I don't know. I'll probably get in trouble here, or I can get myself into trouble with the.
Oh, please.
internet
That is
audience, right?
why we
So,
have
I
the
think.
Green Dragon. Yeah.
I think the only. I think the only truly great Lord of the Rings movie is the theatrical version of Fellowship.
The theatrical version of Fellowship.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think. So I say that
You are going to get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, I know.
We might have
Yeah.
to censor this.
Yeah.
So
Warning.
I think
Triggered.
I think actually the way that I see this most clearly, I think my reason for that is kind of borne out in the Hobbit movies. But I think in some ways the best version of the argument is King Kong. Did you see King Kong? Did you see Jackson's King
Yeah,
Kong?
yeah, I did.
So I think Jackson's King Kong, if he had cut half an hour, would have
Yep.
been good.
Uh-huh.
If he could have cut an hour, would probably have been great. But Peter Jackson is like my kids when they were growing up. Like I like watching them play, but like there should be an adult. And it feels like Peter Jackson was so successful with the first Fellowship movie that he was given permission to do whatever he wanted. And I think the second one and the third one and I would get in trouble even with my wife because she loves
She loves those extended versions. Oh
I-
man, they came in that those padded
Oh, yeah.
cases. They
Yeah.
were all artistic. I mean, they had the concept art. I mean, it was great.
I just think they're too long.
Mm-hmm.
They're too much in them. And also he adds things. All right. So
Mhm.
even if you're just making the Tolkien story, they would probably be too long
Mm-hmm.
because the Tolkien's pacing is not a movie pacing. Like he's not doing that.
Right.
That's what Tom Bombadil, like that there isn't a cinematic version of that story that moves briskly along through the Tom Bombadil section. Right.
Right.
It just Tom Bombadil is awesome. I love Tom Bombadil.
Right.
That's a book thing. That's not a
Yeah.
it doesn't work in the movie.
No,
right?
there was a wisdom in cutting it, even
Right.
though people were like, I can't
Right.
believe he cut it.
But then you have Peter Jackson, I
Hmm.
think in the first one, maybe not just Peter Jackson, but there were studios that put a lot of money into it and wanted it to succeed, right? So they were, I think, much stricter with the first one. Once it succeeded, then they were willing to give him more leeway, right? So in the second
So
one,
some of the edits weren't done on
I
the.
just think there's very little editing,
Oh.
especially in the third one. I mean, it has like what 500 endings, I think. Fade to black, and then you can fade to white so that we don't confuse it with the fades to black, or like there's just a lot of endings in that. So
Sure.
in the Two Towers, but then he adds, even aside from just doing what Tolkien did and have it maybe not be cinematic, he also just adds stuff, right? So if you think about the Two Towers,
Yep.
he adds somebody you think is going to die who does not die, right? When Aragorn gets dragged off by the wargs for some reason and then is not dead, right? And if you think about it, it feels a little bit like somebody needed to take Peter Jackson, hey, PJ, so have you read these books? So there are going to be a couple of instances where you're going to think somebody's dead, and it's important to think that they're dead. I don't know, Gandalf, Frodo. Like, you're supposed to think that they're dead, and then they come back.
Yeah.
You can do that you can go to the person's dead but not actually dead well a certain number of times. You don't need to just add one. Like, it's just going to lessen it later on. Like, who thinks, for people that have not read the books, is there any particular reason to think that Frodo gets killed by Shelob? No. There's been people dying and not dying all over the place.
All right.
Right?
Yeah.
So adding that with Aragorn just feels weird to me. Like, that just feels undisciplined, and it feels like it's not paying attention to the story itself, right? And then you get to the Hobbit. You're like, yeah, I don't think he understood the story. I don't think he understands the point of the Hobbit at all.
Hmm.
And so you just keep adding stuff to make 3 movies worth of. I mean, I'll be honest.
3 long movies.
I
with
don't
it.
think I have stayed awake through all 3 of those movies. I know there's sections that happened that I did not see because I woke up and like, there's just too much in them, right? So what is it? Is it Bilbo that talks about butter being, he feels like butter spread over too much bread? Right?
Mm,
That's
yeah.
what those movies are. They're just, it's a really neat story that's blown, well, it's just way too long.
Yeah.
Right? Because studios want to make money, and so what they want is to have intellectual property that they know people like, and then just use it for as long as they possibly can. Right? Probably a great Hobbit movie in there. In fact, I think I've never seen it, but there is a version which is like 90 something minutes long.
Oh yeah, I've
Some
heard a
cut it all the way
rumor.
down, right?
Yeah, I've heard a rumor
You
of
have to
this.
chase it around YouTube because because I'm pretty sure New Line doesn't want it around, so
Right.
getting rid of it, right? But like I think
Yeah.
there's probably and that's what I
Yeah, they
think
took
about
what, like the 10 hours or whatever it is that the 3 hot.
Right.
Wait, are there 3 Hobbit movies or there 4?
Hobbit movies.
3.
Yeah.
3.
They
Okay.
came out with extended versions.
So that's what I think about King Kong, right? So I think like, yeah, so he needs an editor. He needs somebody to make him be disciplined. He's not instinctively disciplined. And if he's really successful, then then the studios aren't going to discipline him. So
Because they don't want to piss him off and not have
also,
to make an-
I don't think they think there's a reason to,
right.
or because they think, oh, well, whatever he's
They know it'll
doing,
sell anyway.
whatever he's doing, people are showing up to watch.
Yeah.
So let's leave it alone.
I mean, that's one of the criticisms that was leveled against what's her J.K. Rowling with the number 4 through 7 of the Harry Potter books. I mean, like, you look at the thickness of it's like 1 is like clearly a children's novel,
Yeah.
2 is like an average length novel, 3 is a slightly long novel, but totally within bounds. And then they get thick. You know what I mean? Like 4 through 7 are door stoppers,
Yep.
right? Frankly, I never read them. I hear from people who are about 4 to 10 years younger than me,
Uh-huh.
like, yes, Harry Potter was the story
Uh-huh.
of my childhood, books and movies. Like that is that generation. So this would have been like the youngest millennials, the oldest of Gen Z, the youngest millennials. That's our story. Like,
Mhm.
Harry Potter belongs to us.
Mhm.
But I heard the same criticism leveled that all of a sudden the editors just wouldn't say to J.K. Rowling, like, hey, this is a cool thing you've written, but maybe it belongs in like a collection of short stories that we publish later, or like, but it doesn't belong here. It might be good.
Yep.
But you haven't, what's your phrase? You have a phrase, kill your babies.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's not
yeah.
my phrase. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
that's a phrase that comes from people who have been writing or doing things for much longer than I have.
Okay.
But it is in fact, I mean, I've written enough to know that it's true, right?
Mm.
So again, if you have a really good editor, so when I was writing movie reviews kind of regularly instead of just for my own
Mm.
amusement, I had an editor, Elizabeth Scalia,
Hmm.
who was a wonderful editor, right? And I would send her my reviews, which I pretty much always finished at the last second and late at night. And pretty much every time I send it out, I'm like, this is actually pretty terrible. I have no idea what's going on here, right? And without fail, there may be a couple of exceptions. Pretty much every time, she would send back to me something which eliminated my favorite thing.
Hmm.
And it was always right. Right. So you really do get hung up on, I mean, killing your babies is kind of a grotesque way of describing it, but you do get hung up on things that you really like. Like, I really like this thing that I did.
Hmm.
And somebody needs to say, I believe you really like that thing that you did. It doesn't actually work. Usually you've kind of protected it, right? In the rest of the piece or movie or whatever.
You've
it is,
written
right?
around
And
it.
so you've kind of, yeah. And so in fact, you're like, okay, now you, in some ways, because I liked it, I kind of created it a way in which it didn't fit with anything else.
Right.
Right? It doesn't actually fit anymore because I left it alone. Right.
Hmm.
And I think even if you're not, even if you don't have an editor that is helping you that way, even if you write something, or if you're Peter Jackson and you make something, what you need to be able to do is put it aside and come back to it like 3 days later and make it, cut a third of it. Just
Hmm.
figure out a third of it to get rid of. Like, it's always better.
And you're going to make some really hard, really painful decisions.
Yep.
But in the end, you'll be like,
Right.
I did need
And
to do that.
right. And so I don't know. I mean, we should go through all the special features if you go through extended edition stuff
Uh-huh.
with Peter Jackson stuff, you're like, oh yeah, so he just took stuff out because in a way it was too long. It doesn't feel like it's better or worse than the other stuff.
Hmm.
Right. But if you watch special features for some movies that I think are great, you'll end up with a scene where you're like, this is an amazing scene. Why did they take this scene out? Right.
Hmm.
And then you kind of look back on it afterwards and say, yeah, I don't know how that'll work. Right. So one of the, Sean and I, my son, and
Yep.
I were talking a couple days ago about perfect movies.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, that's an impossible conversation, fact, right? But
Godfather comes close.
yeah, so I'm also less of a Godfather fan than most. But
All right. I'll fight you on that one.
sure,
Yeah.
we'll get there in a moment. So that's not one of the ones I think of. One of the things that I think of is Casablanca, right? And I think of Casablanca and I say, I don't know what can be added or subtracted from that movie that makes it better than the way it is, right? That movie is an extraordinary example of, like, it's infinitely rewatchable. Like, you can watch it forever. And every time you watch it, you realize how kind of fully fleshed out all those little incidental characters around the edges of the story are. They're
Mm-hmm.
all kind of perfectly realized, even if you only see them for 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And so you get to the point where you're like, yeah, I don't know how to make this longer or shorter without making it less good.
Yeah.
Somehow we kind of captured that, right?
Yeah.
I don't tend to think of Godfather that way, but
No, I love The Godfather, but no, I think I've seen Casablanca almost as many times as I've seen The Godfather. Um, uh,
those are
A-
very different movies.
Amortals really references The Godfather quite a bit in his novel A Gentleman from Moscow.
Huh?
Yeah, and in fact it comes up in one of the last scenes in the book in which he talks about how Rick is so attentive to the details and adjusts the tablecloth after this kerfuffle in which the police come in and they raid the casino and everything. And but at the end, after everything's left and there's so many larger issues to attend to, Rick almost absentmindedly adjusts the tablecloth to make sure that it's hanging correctly again.
Yep.
And again, from Amortals has his characters in the novel, A Gentleman of Moscow, interpret that as this was a man who was really concerned about the comfort of others. And that was Rick's virtue. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's a wonderful movie. And I remember most recent time we watched it thinking, I don't really even care about France. Right. But I don't know who can watch that scene where they're singing the national anthem kind of, and the Germans are trying to sing the German anthem, right? And everybody stands up and sing and with Laszlo, right? Like, that's incredibly moving. Like, that scene is, I feel like a patriot. I'm like, wait a second, what? This is about France. I don't, right? But that scene is so powerful, right?
right. Yeah.
I remember showing Casablanca to your class.
To my class. Wow.
In the basement of
Yeah. So this would have been 15 years ago.
A number of years ago.
A while back.
It was some number of years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember, so when I show that movie to an audience, so I remember asking, first of all, who's seen this, and nobody had seen it.
Oh, wow.
or maybe one or two people had seen it, right? Out of the whole group that was in the basement.
Yeah.
And when I do that, I'm like, oh gosh, I wonder. I feel that way sometimes when I show silent movies too. Like, are they not gonna like it? Like, is it too not of their time? Are they looking for something that's more exciting, or what?
Or zip.
But I remember getting to the end of that movie and everybody loved it. I remember, first of all, feeling great about you guys, like, oh, these kids are the best.
Right.
Because they
Right.
watch Casablanca, they've never seen it and they love it, right? But there is something about that movie
Mm.
which still now is so effective. Like it's a perfect movie. I don't know what you change, right?
Right. Right. You're never left thinking, oh man, I wish they had.
I wish
Or
they'd
I
done
wish they
this.
hadn't.
Why did they do this? Right?
Right.
It never happens.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you on Casablanca. I need to rewatch it. One movie I feel that way about is Margin Call. Man,
Mm.
yeah. Have you seen?
I've never seen that. No. I know
Oh,
of it, but
oh, dude, you got to watch Margin Call. It's sort of,
has Spacey in it. Is that right?
it has Spacey, it has Jeremy Irons, it has
It's about the financial.
it's yeah, it's about
sector.
it's sort of a amalgamation of and a compression of conversations that probably happened inside Goldman Sachs, AIG, and maybe Bear Stearns. You know, Bear Stearns closed down, so it's kind of hard to say exactly what happened there at the end because they went belly up. But it's sort of a a compression into about like 24 hours, give or take, of a financial firm that's unnamed
Mhm.
in the movie that realizes the markets are about to crash and we have bets out there that if we lose our bets we will go bankrupt,
Mhm.
right? So we basically have to sell our bet position to a bunch of unsuspecting customers. So I mean, imagine these financial products were, imagine you have a bet on the outcome of a game between the Yankees and the Mets or whatever, right? And you bought this bet, for $100, right? But all of a sudden, you were so confident the Yankees were going to win that if the Yankees lose, you owe the other side like $1 million, right? So, and you have stacks and stacks of these bets, and you've leveraged other things because again, you were so confident the Yankees were going to win. All of a sudden, you realize it's the ninth inning and the Yankees are down by 8, and
Somehow have to convince everybody to take your.
and now you have to sell. You don't have to sell the other side of the bet. You have to sell your bet position, right? And so it's how they strategize to. We have this toxic thing. We have to get it off.
Yeah.
And how are we going to do that?
Oh, interesting. So
Yeah.
a little bit like The Big Short, maybe, or it's something kind of along those lines, right? Where
It's
you're
about the same events, but it's
you're trying to, but what you're trying to do, at least cinematically, is you're trying to explain something which is in a movie. You're trying to explain something which isn't necessarily easily explainable, right?
nor particularly entertaining.
Yeah.
Right. So this was one of the complaints about that movie Dumb Money that came out a couple of years ago. And one of the critics, and I think he made a good point, is that sort of what Dumb Money was trying to do was trying to represent events as they might have actually happened. And so what actually probably happened is depicted in the movie, in which people look at computer screens and television screens and their phones,
Yeah.
and they see the performance of various financial products, and they look at their phones and say, oh shit, right? And that's basically the movie is
So
2 hours of, oh shit,
So that,
oh shit.
So that's
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's one of the either the geniuses or failures of people trying to adapt things, right? Which
Trying to
is
what?
adapt things, right?
Mhm,
So if you take you go back to literature again, right? So if you if you take something which is in one medium, you're trying to kind of translate it to another medium.
Yeah.
It rarely works, except for maybe the TV adaptation of
True
Evelyn-
Detective,
No, the Evelyn Waugh book now. I can't remember that.
Men at Arms. I mean, the movie version of Brideshead was a disaster.
Not the movie version, the TV version of Brideshead.
Oh, the TV version
TV
of
version of
Brideshead.
Brideshead is, I think, almost a perfect adaptation.
Okay, I've not seen
It's
the
the one
TV
that
version.
it has Jeremy Irons.
Okay.
Laurence Olivier.
Okay.
So thanks for remembering. I could not, I could remember the Twitch on the thread, but I can't remember the name. So the TV version of Brideshead is kind of blow for blow the book. In fact, at one point I remember thinking, oh, so I wonder how they've adapted that. They probably changed the language, and you go back and look at the language, it's basically just straight out of the book. But often, if you're taking but the movie version would be a good example, right? If you take something which is a book and you try to turn it into a movie, it's not going to work to just be, again, kind of paint by number, right? You're going to probably need to do something like, I don't know, get rid of Tom Bombadil, which is going to make some people unhappy, right? But actually makes more sense in trying to translate from one medium to another, right? I think sometimes you have that with stage, taking something which is a very successful stage play where you try to make a movie out of it, right? Where what you do is you have people stand like they would on a stage and speak, and you say, yeah, I think I could just somebody could just set up a movie camera at the playhouse,
Theater.
and that'd be getting the same thing. I don't know what, I'm not sure what's extra here.
Mhm.
Right? So that's kind of in some ways that I not having seen Margin Call, but The Big Short is that way, right? You're like, wow. So what you need to do is try to find a way to translate into this medium,
Yep.
which is very visual and can kind of allow you to compress time and various things, right? You need to try to translate into this medium something which is not on the face of it very interesting, or maybe plenty interesting, but not very
But
engaging,
incomprehensible.
not very
That's-
engaging, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, so why what is it about Margin Call that you think makes it because we were talking about perfect movies and you were thinking,
Yeah. I don't know if I would put it quite up there in the 10 out of 10s.
Sure.
I would certainly put certain scenes
Mhm.
at 10 out of 10
Mhm.
because by that measure of can you watch it again and again?
Yeah.
And I think there are multiple scenes in that movie where you can watch it again and again because you can again, I would relate it to something you said is that you really feel as if you understand these characters, which you've technically only watched for 15 minutes
Sure.
or half an hour,
Yeah.
47 minutes.
Yeah.
And yet you feel like you know these people.
Yeah,
you
they've
know what's
captured something, right?
they've captured it.
Something which is really real. I think every now and then, yeah, if I think about scenes, so Terrence Malick, right, is a director who, again, I think I love less than I'm supposed to, but less than people expect me to, maybe, right? But I remember there's a scene in Tree of Life where the mother has just found out that her son died.
Okay.
Right? She's kind of wandering around in the neighborhood, and people are coming up to try to comfort her, various things, right? And since it's Terrence Malick, the kind of the storyline is not the strongest part of what he's doing. Right? There's a lot of wandering that goes on, but there's also curtains, definitely curtains. But I remember at one moment kind of seeing she's reaching up and kind of pulling on the skin on her neck. This is Jessica Chastain, right? Who's playing the mother. She's kind of pulling on the skin on her neck, and I remember thinking, that's true. Like there's something there which is true. Like he's found, like people do things like this, right? There are, we all do that. I mean, I'm sure you're doing stuff right now, and I'm like just things that are become kind of habitual that we don't think even about, that are part of our behavior, right? But I just remember thinking, oh, she's thinking about this thing, like kind of this great grief she's dealing with right now, and people are trying to come up to comfort her and various things, and there's this little kind of physical mannerism that just seems really true to me, right? Like, yeah, he captured something there, right? And I think he spends a lot of time not capturing stuff in that also, but he does do that, right? So and I think that's for me why I tend to gravitate towards, we're kind of talking about earlier. I tend to think of movies that are, they don't have to be made by somebody who agrees with me necessarily, right? But that they're trying to represent something that they see as real. And if they're good, if they do that, even if we might not agree about various other things, political things, or who knows what, right? But if they're trying to do that, then I think often you can find those things in the movie, right? And so it's one of the things we say, yeah, so if you have filmmakers who are Christian and they're trying to make Christian movies, right? That is
Facing the giants.
that's rarely the thing. I have all the time. There are things that I would like to do,
Fireproof.
and the fact that I want to do them, and that I'm sincere about wanting to do them, doesn't actually mean that I do them, right? So the sincerity is not in fact the thing, right? That makes it possible to succeed. But if you are, so I think in fact, if you're if your calling card for making a great movie is that you're a Christian, you probably won't end up with one. End up with a movie which is very Christian and great, and not necessarily be Christian at all, right?
Right.
So
But it's a cinematic sermon.
right, but it's to in some ways to be working backwards, right? So you, this is in some ways I would say this is kind of the other side of the coin of what I think Scorsese is doing, right?
Okay.
So I think he's accurately portraying a worldview that I disagree with, right? I think on the other side, you can have people who inaccurately portray a world that I do agree with.
Right.
Those are kind of the same problem in a way, because both of them are leaving out the truth of the world in a way, right?
Right.
Now I wouldn't necessarily blame them both the same way, right? But it's the same failure in a way, which is they're not
This isn't
they're
right.
not accurately portraying something,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And I
This
think it's
couldn't.
'cause
This
they're working
can't.
backward. They're working backwards from we think the world is this way, so it must be this way out here. I kind of have to go the other direction. But
Right. It can't be a guidepost.
Right.
Right. Where there are movies, books, there are pieces of art that are guideposts in how you live your life. I mean, this is not the only reason to read great literature or watch great movies, but one of the effects can be that they serve as guideposts in your life. Again, I don't think that's the only or primary reason, but I remember, again, going back to that Calvary movie, I remember watching that and thinking, I want to be like the main character. And because he's good without being artificially perfect. He's clearly a specific personality and not a perfect personality, right? He's rough around the edges. He's at times too blunt, but he is good.
Yeah.
But the very fact that he's
he tries to run away, right? I mean,
Right.
he kind of has to drag himself back.
he has to drag himself.
He
Yeah.
doesn't want to do the thing that he's supposed to to be doing, right?
Yeah.
Which is I think some of the interesting parallels, just what the word what the title means, and kind of the things that the fact that it takes place basically over like Holy Week, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You and I were talking about the Alex Garland movies about, golly, this was probably like 2 years ago. Yeah.
That got wild.
Yeah. Because he had not just come out with Annihilation, but then he had made Ex Machina, which I found interesting. I found Annihilation more compelling. And then,
Oh, interesting. So have you, I'm not disagreeing. Have you seen Stalker?
Stalker.
Yeah.
No. Is that like his early?
No, that's not Alex Garland. So
Oh, okay.
it's, Andrei Tarkovsky.
Andrei Tarkovsky.
But-
Okay. I got to write this down.
But Annihilation is very much very clearly influenced by Stalker.
Okay.
So Stalker is about these people who go into a zone. It's called the zone, and the zone is kind of alien and very green and filled with plants, and everything around it looks like, I don't know, like didn't just look like, actually was kind of connected to a nuclear power plant in Russia. But so it's very influenced by that. But so you should definitely watch Stalker.
Okay.
But tell me more about where you're going with Annihilation.
The reason I found it compelling, and I watched it by myself in theaters, and how do you, what's a good word for, you didn't like it, but you wanted to see it again because there was something there, right? But you didn't, it's not like, oh man, that was fun, right? I then watched it with my twin brother who hated it. Oh, he hated it.
Hated it. Why? Thought it was too.
I think any certain members of my family, any movie that is somewhat ambiguous with its ending leaves him and other members of my family so frustrated that there's not a specific resolution that it ruins the whole movie. It's like, wait, you're not being specific with your ending. Therefore, your movie has no thesis.
Interesting. I don't guess. I don't. I'd love to. I have this happen to me from time to time. It also happens with Inception, right? I don't think the ending of Annihilation is particularly ambiguous. Interesting, but
yeah.
Also it has some incredibly powerful scenes, like the bear cow.
Yeah,
is one of the most horrifying images I've got in my head. Like just having yeah,
right,
I think it's creepy.
right.
And it gets wilder and wilder the closer to the lighthouse they get, right?
Yes,
Stuff
yes.
just gets wilder and wilder and wilder.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a couple of reasons I find it compelling. There are scenes like the one with the bear, the one with the alligator that has shark's teeth.
Yep.
Right. There are
Plants?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. There are specific scenes where I'm like, going on.
Yep.
Right. I want answers.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of scenes that are like, whoa, I
Yeah.
want answers. What are you saying? Right. One level above that, it hits on some storytelling ideas that I had thought of either previously or just have kept coming back to, like their first morning inside the zone, when they realize it's not our first morning inside the zone. Like, we have eaten a third of our supplies.
Yep.
Right. But we're fine. Like, we're not hurt.
Yeah.
But
And the audience is kind of put in the same space, right?
Right.
Because you don't.
It's like,
Yeah.
we just don't remember. Right. Right. And that I just find that is a personally appealing storytelling moment of like, what does a human being do when it reacts to coming back from the other side? And at the risk of being a bit of a tangent, the reason I find it so compelling is because in jiu-jitsu, if you get choked out, right, and you lose blood to the brain, it feels the same way. Like, you feel like you're coming out of this dream world that there's this strange mixture of where am I, but also this strange mixture of mental clarity because there's no distractions. Anyway, I'm talking a little bit about some personal
I usually try
appeal.
not to get choked out. But
I do every day. Yeah, shout out to my jiu-jitsu buddies. I want you to know I'm trying not to get choked out. It's not the new high for me. Yeah, I am trying. Yeah, not looking to get choked
Another
out.
thing that I love about that movie is, so I think it's really interesting to me that I think that in a way that the movie is making the point that there's a difference between annihilation and destruction. Right?
Yeah.
That they are completely lost in the new thing, right? But they're not destroyed. Right? Which is the weird thing about the further in that they get, right? And even, maybe even the Oscar Isaac character, right? Because I think that's where you could see ambiguity. Like, I don't think it's ambiguous. I don't think he's not the person from the beginning.
He's not her husband. Yeah.
Right. So what has happened is her husband has been annihilated. Like, he's been completely subsumed. His existence has been completely subsumed into this other thing.
Yep.
But this other thing, but he's not gone.
Yeah.
Right. He's just annihilated. Right? He's not destroyed.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that in a way that's what the whole movie is doing. Right. The further in that they get. But yeah,
right. But
it is wild.
Right. But yeah. And I think Alex Garland in that movie is trying to play with like a light side of that and a dark side of that. So again, everyone who's listening, you should go see this movie. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that, like Joseph has been describing, there's a way in which what someone is and what someone has been carrying and their life experiences gets transferred over into the thing that subsumes them. Right. And so the dark side of that is like when the bear is trying to growl, but what comes out is the voice of the last person it attacked.
Right. So that's why, in fact, what you'd say is it works on both the light and the dark side, right?
Mhm.
But it would be better
Mm.
if she was destroyed.
Right.
But she's not.
Mm.
So she has become part of the thing.
Hmm.
And the thing that she's become a part of is more horrifying because of that, right? Because
Right.
she's not destroyed. She doesn't cease altogether.
It's not,
There's
bear
still-
didn't eat her.
Yeah.
She sort of,
She became the bear, like she became part of the bear,
Yeah.
in a way, right? And so then that's where it's in a way more horrible as a
Right.
result.
right. But on the kind of lighter side, the Tessa Thompson character just
Yeah,
sort of
becomes
opens up her arms
becomes a
to,
plant.
yeah,
Sorry.
right.
Also
But she opens up her arms to it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's, yeah,
and
and it's
and those plants are beautiful,
right. And it's
right,
not
right,
unlovely, yeah.
right. And I think kind of the same thing you have when you get to the lighthouse,
Mm.
right, where the actual Oscar Isaac is dead
Hmm.
and has kind of turned into this spectacular thing,
Hmm.
right? In some ways, it's a more extreme version of the Tessa Thompson thing,
Hmm.
right? Where you're like, yeah, he's annihilated, but not destroyed.
Mhm.
Something else that has come out of this thing,
Right.
It's
Right.
like, in a way, it's a kind of a Hegelian uh, thesis, antithesis, and then you get a synthesis of a thing. Like you get
Mhm.
something which is the product of both of these things.
Right. Right.
It's not. It hasn't destroyed either of those things,
Mhm.
but they're not. But they don't exist anymore the way they did
Right.
to start with, right?
This isn't a parasite digesting you. It's somehow, yeah, it's not living
But
off of you, but at the same time, you're not there
yeah,
because of it.
but yeah, you should definitely watch Stalker because
Okay.
it's very. You can tell it's very heavily influenced by Stalker,
Okay.
which has a lot of the same kind of flavor, kind of
Mm.
vibe to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Tarkovsky is tough, but I love Tarkovsky.
Tarkovsky.
Andrei Tarkovsky. So he's the fellow that made Stalker. He made Andrei Rublev.
Okay.
He made Ofret, or The Sacrifice, which is one of my very favorite movies. He's a Russian director. I think he was Russian Orthodox. He wrote a book which is really great about movie making, which is called Sculpting in Time,
Mm-hmm.
and about the way that kind of there's an odd thing that film is, right, which allows you to both represent time but capture it at the same time. Right. So if you're watching a play, whatever you're watching is gone after you watch it, right?
Yeah.
So you can't kind of capture it.
Mm-hmm.
The next time they do it, even if they try to do exactly like the day before, they actually won't. Like it won't be exactly the same. Can't actually capture the thing.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas with a movie, you're kind of sculpting in time. Like you're creating this thing that takes time, but you're also able to. You're not freezing it because the thing you create has time,
Mm-hmm.
but you've captured it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's always going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. Right. Which is what part of what gives it its appeal.
Right. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you can go back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's an extraordinary thing about a great stage production too, right? You say one of the neat things about this is they're going to do something different every night,
Right.
like
Right.
some other thing every night.
Right.
But
Yeah.
being able to go back and look at the same thing over and over again is also really valuable. It's just a
Yeah.
different kind of, value, seems to me.
Right. Right. Yeah. And the way that a book can be revisited, a movie can be revisited in a way that a play can be enacted in such a physical way.
Right,
A
yeah.
movie can be,
Yeah.
a screenplay can be enacted in that physical way by
Yeah.
those actors.
Yeah.
And by the entire production team. I mean, it's
But you can kind of go back with a movie.
Mhm.
And it's also, I think, it's neat to think about the ways in which which cinema is collaborative,
Mhm.
right? So,
Yeah.
if I were writing a novel, I'm kind of maybe I want an editor. I personally want an editor because editors are helpful, right? But if I'm writing a novel, it's kind of my thing,
Mhm.
presenting my thing. I want audiences to interact with it, right?
Sure.
But it's my thing.
Yep.
with a movie, it's not my thing. It doesn't even matter how much I think I'm an auteur or how much I'm going to throw people off the set or whatever, however crazy I am as a director. It's not my thing. I can't do it, right? Without, so use Calvary again. So Martin McDonough said that, I guess Brendan Gleeson says when he put on, he discovered that he felt different when he put on the clerics.
Hmm.
He said it felt like armor to him in a way that he had never really thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin McDonough says that it kind of the way Brendan Gleeson was doing Father James, right?
Yeah.
Was performing Father James made him see things that he hadn't noticed, right? It's not as we were talking about it a little bit earlier. I think Martin McDonough is trying to accurately kind of capture something. So I'm not saying that Gleason put something into it that Martin didn't want or something, right? But he didn't see those things clearly until Brendan Gleeson was doing that, right? So then what I think if you're kind of humble as a creator to the thing you're creating in a way, right? With the group you're creating it with, you'll want that stuff, right? Well, I think you probably would want Brendan Gleeson in most movies, right? I love him. He's fabulous. But
One of the best of,
You
yeah,
want-
one of the best.
you want him to find something that you weren't necessarily thinking of, right? So I think there's in a way, in fact, the auteur, if you are the auteur, or think you're an auteur, there's something diminishing about that. I think in a way,
You have to stand in humility to your own.
it would be better for you to say these people are going to bring something to what I'm working on, which I wouldn't be able to bring on my own. Right? In fact, the thing will be better
Mm-hmm.
in the long run, right? Because it's a collaborative medium. And that's one of the reasons I think, both because it's collaborative, both in its essence, right? So it's combining all these different mediums. So there's kind of a collaboration there in art, in literature and music and visual, all those things, right? They're kind of collaborating together, but also the creative process is also collaborative. The people creating it are collaborating. Right? So I like that. Like, it just makes it feel very rich to me in a way that, I mean, I love literature too, right? But
Sure.
But when I'm reading Brothers K,
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting what was in Dostoevsky's head, and it's fabulous. But
Yeah.
it's also what was in his head, and nobody else's, right? But there's a kind of a blending of things in film, where I could say, well, gosh, this looks to me like it actually comes from Brendan Gleeson. Like this is something that we wouldn't have had without Brendan Gleeson, right?
Yeah.
And so he's adding. He's a creator in a way in the project, above and beyond just Martin McDonough pulling the various strings that he wants to pull or something, right?
Right. Movies allow the rest of the team to share in that authorship in a way that few mediums really allow.
And I think it allows you to see the artistry of other people, right?
Mhm.
You can see, oh, this is a director who's always doing certain things. I like what he's doing. I'm going to watch the movies that he makes because I like what he's doing. But so for me, another Conrad Hall is a great cinematographer.
Okay.
Roger Deakins
Roger
is
Deakins.
amazing, right? I think Roger Deakins is as important in the power of most movies he's involved with as the director is, right? I think he's an absolute master of his craft.
Uh-huh.
I think he's amazing to see what he does. And you can, once you kind of start to recognize the other elements that people bring to the movie, right? Like, oh, I can study Roger Deakins. I could just look at what he does. That doesn't mean that he's more important than the director or less important. He's kind of perfecting this little part of his, not little, but he's perfecting this part of he's perfecting his role in this thing, right?
Right.
And so you can look at what he's doing and say, oh, when I see this thing in, as an example, most recently I was watching a scene from Sicario.
Oh, that's Taylor Sheridan's script, right?
Yeah, Taylor Sheridan's script and
Denis Villeneuve.
Yep.
Yeah.
But shot by Roger Deakins, right?
Ah,
The
okay.
sequence where they're going down into they're going to go down into the bunker.
Down.
where they're all-
Yes.
We're
Yeah.
all wearing the night goggles. and
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the whole sequence down in the actual bunker with the night goggles is amazing, right? The way he uses the like the extreme whatever the night goggles would do, like the black and white, basically, right? And he shows the footprints, right? All those things. Those things are amazing, right? But the scene right before that, right before they even get down into the bunker, which is as the sun is going down,
Mm-hmm.
and they're walking along kind of against the horizon, and they're going down, right? But you can't. They're kind of silhouetted
Yeah.
against the horizon, and you can't see. You know that they're going down, and you know they're going down a hill or something, right? But you can't see that. It's too dark for that. So you just see the horizon, and then them just kind of vanishing down into the blackness, which is below the horizon, right? And I remember looking at that, just thinking that's an amazing scene. It's not amazing in the script.
Mm.
I mean, they're walking.
Yeah.
I mean, you might even say like they walk against the sunset or something, but like, it's not amazing because of the script, and it's not amazing because there's great performances. You can't even see anybody's face, right? It's amazing because of what it looks like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or the other example for Roger Deakins that I always use is the train robbery inside the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Ah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that train robbery, first of all, references like old silent movies.
Yep.
So I always love that. But also it's just amazing visually. Like it's gorgeous to look at, right? And I'm sure there are a variety of exciting train robbery sequences to be made, but that one is beautiful. It's just beautiful to watch, right? And that's Roger Deakins. He's doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people are getting in his way or something, right? They're not trying to stop him from doing it.
Right.
But that's the thing that he's adding to the movie, not, I mean, say the director might have known that Roger Deakins would do something great. So hiring him is the director's fault, and that's a good idea, right? But Roger Deakins is actually doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think those things are just neat to me. Like you can notice those things, right? And I think once you start noticing those things, then you start noticing a lot more of them. Not just Roger Deakins, but like any kind of those things, right? And then all of a sudden you start to be more aware of the craft that's involved, or like the actual creation that goes into those things, right? And then I think it becomes easier to think of them as an art form and not think of them so much as just being entertaining.
Mm.
And that's kind of like that's just kind of the movement I want everybody to do, like go in this direction.
Mm.
Sure, I like to be entertained also, but so that's why one of my rules with the students is, which you're not allowed to do. Well, first of all, you're not allowed to talk because I had too many little kids and I can't stand kids talking in movies, right? So you can't talk. You have to be silent. We'll pause if you want. You can always pause and ask questions. So if anybody wants to pause, we'll talk, but we're not watching and talking at the same time. Got to do one of those.
This isn't Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Although, I mean, my kids are super sarcastic, so am I. We love doing that, right? But I don't do that with movies that I care about, right? And then the third rule is you can't leave. You don't watch and go. Like, I think the movies that I'm trying to show, or even the things I want you to think about when you're watching movies, should be something that generates a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even if it's just about how the movie achieved what it achieved, right?
Right.
And we showed Calvary. You get to the end of that movie, and the first of all, the music's fabulous in that movie, right? You get to the end, and then the credits roll, and then you turn the light on, and people just sit there. Like, you need to work on that movie. Like, you don't want to just watch that movie and then be like, oh, cool, time to go back.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do something else now. Woohoo, right? That's the wrong way to react to that movie, right? So you should be burdened by that movie and kind of like the catharsis in it is really wonderful, but you have to work at it. Right? Don't just think of it as entertainment, right?
Right.
Think of it kind of directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, those are my soapboxes. So my kids hear those things all the time. But
Right. Right. Don't talk. Don't leave. Don't talk. But then once it ends, you need to stay and talk.
then talk, right?
Right.
So because it's like, I mean, in a way, that's the mean, that's the educational environment I grew up in. That's the educational environment you guys experienced too, right? Like I like to have the conversation about the movie also be kind of collaborative. Like I have always learned something from talking to people about a movie, even movies that I'm very familiar with, right?
Mm.
It's always helpful.
I mean, I always enjoyed that when I would go see movies at the theater.
Yep.
I hated it when people would watch and they book it out.
Yeah.
Like, what we gotta talk about? We just
Right. We got to stand outside in the cold.
Yeah.
And go,
Oh yeah.
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 all right. So what did you think?
Great movie.
Right. But I think that's because I think that instinct there is the instinct to think of it as the kind of thing which you should kind of be sincere about, right? I think it's good to think of movies as something, not all of them. Michael Bay, for example. Michael Bay is going to be really loud and very shiny. The military will look really good. And I don't think he's made a particularly good movie for some time. I do think The Rock is a really good movie. I think Armageddon is a perfect example of what it is. But since then, there's a lot of noise. I can't see that there's a lot of metal robots. I don't know what they're doing anymore. I can't tell.
Neither does Michael Bay.
Right. That's part
Yeah.
of it, right? But so there are some people who are just trying to do something like that, right? But I think even most people that kind of get into it, unless they're just a studio person who just wants to do whatever Disney wants to do, they get into it because they want to tell a story of some kind, or they want to say something, right? And I think it's not an obligation on the audience, but I think it's a good instinct as an audience person to say, okay, so what's he trying to say to me? What was this how was I supposed to feel about this? Like, what was this trying to do? It doesn't mean, yeah, you might get to the end and think, oh, well, I guess it wasn't trying to do that much. Right. But still the kind of the instinct to think, okay, I think it's supposed to be kind of a conversation of some sort, right? How, I don't think most people who make movies are making them without wanting people to watch them, right? Maybe it's because they want to make money, right? But I think also it's just kind of the instinct is you're trying to tell a story,
Right.
and you want people to hear the story. You kind of need both sides of that equation. And I
Sure.
think if we're very passive about it or dismissive, like, oh, it's done, time to roll out, then you're kind of not fulfilling in a way your side of the bargain somehow.
Right. Oh, right. Again.
That's why you end up with bad movies. To get to bring all the because that's how you end up with bad movies. You end up with bad movies because people are not trying to actually they're kind of failing on maybe one or both sides of that equation, right? They're not trying to say something, or they're not trying to hear something, or they're not thinking of it as a conversation.
They're not trying to spark some questions. Yeah.
Or even if it's not a question. I mean, I don't think everything has to be kind of philosophically driven, right? But
Yeah.
they're trying to produce a certain response.
Yep.
At least like talk about what you enjoyed of the movie. I mean, last year when we went and saw Spider-Verse.
Oh yeah, the Spider-Verse.
Yeah,
Spider-Verse
that's
movie.
wild.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
There's so much imagination in this.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
It just looked like someone had so much fun making that movie.
Yep.
And they pulled it off.
This is is this the second one? But
I think it applies to both.
Sure.
Yeah.
I remember after seeing the first one, I remember my brother walking out of the theater and being convicted. I'd see that again.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, that means it succeeded.
Sure.
If just out of the blue, you're like, I'd see that again.
Yeah. Well, I remember that. I remember so I like the first one more than the second one because the second one feels like it's leading into a different story, and I don't know where that's going yet, right? But
Right.
I remember the first one. You get out of that movie and you say, I have never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
That is actually a thing I have not seen before. Which is neat. I love that reaction. I love being able to watch that. That's why one of the reasons I love Nolan, right? I remember watching Inception and seeing the kick sequence at the end. And I was like in the theater actually laughing. And I wasn't laughing because it was funny. I was just laughing because he was doing it. Like I was just so pleased at what he had brought to pass. Like it was just like it was just fun, right? But not fun like Michael Bay is, where it's just loud, right? There was something he had been working towards through the whole movie. He's kind of this is in a way the punchline of the whole movie, right? And he gets all the way there, and all along the way, I'm thinking this is crazy. Like he's not gonna. Where is he going? Where is he going? Where is he? And then you get to the end, you're like, oh, that's where he's going. He actually brings all these weird things floating around on the outside down to this one thing, right? Um, yeah, and I just remember thinking, like, I just haven't seen that before. I
Mm.
haven't seen somebody doing something which is kind of that dense of an idea
Yeah.
on that palette with
Mhm.
that much money and kind of on that scale. That's just crazy.
All right.
Right? Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. I've actually seen Interstellar again more times than I think I've seen
uh-huh,
Inception. I enjoyed Inception, but I think Interstellar is one of Nolan's movies that I keep returning to,
uh-huh.
and I think for me, certainly the first time I saw it, I remember thinking like, ugh, either you need to maybe you need to trim this by 20 minutes, or maybe this is really meant to be like a two part, right? Like you watch the first part one night and you watch the second part the next night. I think that is a defensible arrangement.
Uh,
And I think the split is very easy. It's like when they go into space and Michael Caine is intoning that poem,
mhm,
go not gently
yeah,
into the night. And I think that's a very natural split. But anyway,
yeah,
for me, I keep returning to Interstellar's moments when they're on the gravity well planet,
uh-huh.
right? And they're trying to escape those waves while at the same time realizing that every second
Yeah,
they're
the
on the
water
surface.
planet is amazing, right?
Yeah.
Because you got that ticking.
The ticking, yeah. Yeah, they got the ticking in the background. And then the um next sequence that always captures my attention is when they're trying to dock the spaceship on the on the circling
Yep.
on the circling satellite,
Yeah.
right? And they're trying to match their rotation
Yeah.
to the satellite's rotation.
Right. So I remember having a great experience being in the theater watching that and
Okay.
watching the entire theater do this. Right.
Oh,
So he creates an incredibly visceral kind of physical effect because it's such a visceral kind of immersive thing that he's doing. So everybody kind of you do that like through that whole
you're
scene,
trying
you
to
kind of
push
shift like
you're
you
trying to push the
yeah,
spaceship.
it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I need to watch it more because I still struggle with the end because
Okay.
well, not with the end, but with the kind of the last third, right? Because I feel like he's doing something which I understand intellectually, but I like the Tesseract stuff. Like, I understand intellectually what he's doing,
Uh-huh.
but I don't think it's very interesting to watch.
Hmm.
So it feels expository. I
Hmm.
think it kind of it slows down there for me. I
Right.
feel like
Like we had to get here.
right.
And this
It's
is
in some ways the anti-Inception from Inception for me, right? Because I feel like Inception brings all these things into this one thing, which is a very kind of physical, uh, visceral effect.
right.
Everything comes all the way out, right? And the kick brings you all the way out. Like you have to come all the way down here in the building, and then you come all the way out here in the hotel, and you come all the way out here in the bus, right? So or the van, right?
Van.
So it feels like it's a very visceral thing that happens there, but it feels like in Interstellar, getting to the library
And then the
then
library
it
is like,
stops, right? And I don't think it's because, yeah, that's what I just think. At that point, he's doing something which I think is more intellectually interesting to me than visually interesting,
mm,
and I struggle with that. I like a lot of the
I
other
hear you.
pieces. I like a lot of the other parts of it, but it feels like I don't. That doesn't work. It doesn't work the way, or it doesn't work for me the way some of his other stuff works.
I hear you there. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, that last.
I do love it though.
Yeah.
I mean, I love kind of the. I remember especially early on when you did Memento, and I don't know if you ever saw Insomnia.
I
It's
think I
kind of a
did.
very, very well made kind of little kind of thriller movie, right? But
Mm,
then Batman Begins and The Prestige, which I think my favorite Nolan movie is whichever one I'm watching at the moment. If I'm not watching a Nolan movie, then I think my favorite is probably The Prestige. But
ah.
um, because I think it's in many ways the best written. It's the tightest.
Hmm.
Um, but and then you have The Dark Knight, which of course is very dark. Right? And I remember for a while, kind of the account of Nolan was, well, he's pretty cynical. Kind of. And I remember getting to Interstellar and saying, so I think what he's saying is that love is a actual force. Like that doesn't. I've never thought he was cynical, right? So I go back to the ferry scene in The Dark Knight, right, where they're going to blow each other. They have to blow each other up in order to survive,
Right.
and the criminal gets the
That's the trigger. Yeah,
trigger.
the trigger
And he
radio.
says, now I'm going to do what you should have done 20 minutes ago, right? and then he throws it out the window. You're like, that's fabulous. And it's the moment that actually defeats the Joker, because he's expecting it to go off, because he's convinced that the self-interest of the people involved will win out, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. And that's actually a thing that he's not prepared to deal with, right? I've never thought of Nolan as being cynical. I think he's not cynical, right? But I remember getting to Interstellar and then saying, like, yeah, I think what he's saying is that love is an actual force. Like the affection you have for people is the thing that makes you do things. Not thinking like Hugh man. So that's very subtle also. Yeah. Not thinking that Matt Damon's character doesn't do what he should be doing, because he's not motivated by mankind would be better off if we do X, right? Whereas McConaughey's character is motivated by wanting to get back to his daughter. Like, that's the thing that's driving him, not some like it'd be good for mankind, right? So that kind of the idea that the individual love that you have for individual people is the thing that actually makes you do things.
As opposed to that intellectual interest in the
Yeah.
in humanity is
Right.
not enough to actually
Right.
carry
And that's where
the
Michael,
other character through.
right, and that's where Michael Caine's character fails, right? And I think why the who's this? Dylan Thomas? Is that what the rage? Who does the rage against the dying of the light?
Oh, jeez. I'm not gonna be able to
But
pull
so
it up.
that poem I think is kind of a failure in the same way, right? Which is it's an angry man's poem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's in some ways it's Michael Caine's character's poem, not Matthew McConaughey's character's poem.
Right. Oh, for sure.
Anyway, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whew. Should we take a quick break?
yeah, the he I think when this is in a way it's kind of connected to the sculpting in time thing, right? But what happens if you've captured an actual performance and you can watch it over and over and over and over again, right?
Uh-huh.
The two brothers, he absolutely distinguishes. Like the way that the way he's acting, the two brothers, you can tell apart once you're kind of aware of what's going on, right?
Right.
And the moment, like I just remember, so every time I show it, I'm like, oh shoot, they're gonna figure it out. Like it's screamingly obvious. Like, it's just not gonna. Or they don't,
Someone's gonna shout it out.
Right.
They're twins.
right?
Yeah.
In a way, because that's already so. Michael Caine already tells you that's what happened.
Right.
He tells you that's the only way to do this trick, right? And Jackman is so obsessed that he cannot accept that as the answer. That can't be the answer. It's got to be something more complicated. So the answer he comes up with is wild, right? The thing that he actually gets Tesla to do is it turns that movie from a kind of a noir detective-y movie into a science fiction movie. Like what? It's a completely different mode all at once.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I remember watching it. My sister-in-law when she saw it for the first time, like she didn't make that transition. She couldn't transition from one to the other, so she kind of
From like a
lost.
period detective-y
What-
drama.
What is this now? Right.
Right.
Right. But
Yeah.
It's wild. Like so, but I think that's in some ways for me. That's why, because I think that movie is about obsession. Right. It's about how obsessed he is. Jackman's character in particular. Right.
Which at first you may not think of as being the most obsessed
Right.
character.
Because at first you're supposed to think that it's Bale's character, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then in the long run, what you discover is that Jackman is willing to do something. Bale is willing to do something pretty terrible to people that he loves
Mm-hmm.
in order to achieve this trick. So that's not great. None of those people look amazing.
Right.
But Jackman goes wildly beyond that. Wildly beyond that, right? In his kind of obsession. He's obsessed about a different thing. He's not obsessed about kind of perfecting his craft. That's what drives Bale's characters, right? Kind of their obsession with perfecting their craft, living the trick, right? Like
Yeah.
the old Chinaman does.
Yeah.
Right. But he's obsessed with revenge.
Yep.
Right? And it drives him far beyond anything that Bale would do.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bale's character would do.
Right.
But I love that movie because it feels like it's the most it's the tightest written
Okay.
in my mind.
Hmm.
I do like all the Batmans too.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed Batman Begins. It's a Dark Knight. Dark Knight was, yeah, I've watched it multiple times. This is good. Dark Knight Rises, man, I was on board for the first hour. And then the last 45 minutes, again, I'm back on board. That middle act, whew, again, feels like, man, can we have made this 20 minutes shorter? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little,
So
yeah, there's stuff going on. There's stuff they need to accomplish in the characters, but
so what
yeah.
kind of, when you talk about the middle section, what are you talking about there? The stuff in the prison?
The stuff in the prison, the stuff back in Gotham, that the the other secret special forces officer that shows up, but then his character is almost immediately killed, and it's like what's
Yeah.
what's really important about this that's going on?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So in my, so the first thing for me is I don't think of them as three movies. I think it's just one really long movie.
Hmm.
But then the other thing I think I always really like watching them close together
Okay.
in sequence, but in particular because the first one and the third one are very much mirrors of each other.
Uh-huh.
And I think he does some things in the third one to kind of remind you of that. But
Ah.
it's more obvious, I think, when you watch them close together,
Okay.
that they're kind of answers to each other, right? And my my kind of crazy theory about the Nolan Batmans is that I don't think he really cares about Batman. Not particularly interested in Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly he's interested in Bruce Wayne.
Ah.
Right. And the Bruce Wayne character goes from thinking that you make people be good by scaring them. Right. That's kind of the end of the first movie. You have to scare people into being good.
I'm worse than the baddies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is in fact never true. Right. So the Joker makes that point. He's like, look, you have a line. I don't have a line. So I can always go further than you can. You actually have something you have things you're not willing to do, right?
Right.
You can't be the worst. The problem of escalation, right? But so then the second one, he discovers, well, it doesn't really work to just scare people because there are people that I'm not scary to, right?
And that are willing to
And are willing to be scarier than I am.
right. So it's
So then at the end of the second one, what he decides is, well, the way to get people to be good is to lie to them,
mm-hmm.
essentially, right? Which is to hold somebody up as a hero that's not a hero, but that will cause them to do it.
That people won't be scared. They need an image. They need an icon. They need an idol.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then I feel that by the end of the third one, he comes to the point where he says, actually, the way you get people to be good is to be good yourself. Like that's what you do. Like you should be good. Like that's how you get people to be good. Not by being good yourself. Right. So I think by the end of the third one, that he's willing to sacrifice in a way that he was not willing to sacrifice up until then. Right. But I think so Wayne's is the character that's interesting, I think. Those movies. Batman is just, it's a question of how growly Christian Bale's going to be. How much he can move how much the cowl will allow him to move his head or something, right? And, the bike is really cool.
Sure.
And, the truck flipping over, those kind of things, right? But it's really the kind of Bruce Wayne's character going from thinking like the ways that you defeat evil are by being a vigilante. Well, no, that doesn't really work. Or by tricking people into being good. Like, that's not going to work in the long run anyway. The only real way,
because the truth will sort of bubble up.
Right. And that's what happens in The Dark Knight Rises at the beginning, right? Which is he kind of has to deal with the consequences of his lie.
Right.
And Blake's character, like saying, like, this was the wrong thing to do. Like the lesson you should have learned from the ferry was that Gotham is basically good, and that you could rely on Gotham to be good. But instead, you tried to trick them. You didn't trust them to be good. And then you undercut yourself because now they've discovered that you were lying to them.
That's interesting. So in a way, the Joker and the Batman make the same mistake.
Yeah.
We don't trust them. We don't trust them to be good.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep. And that's why the ending of the second one is so frustrating in some ways, right? Because you're like, you guys are kind of making the same mistake.
Uh-huh.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why I like, I think in Nolan's movies, often children are very perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we were talking a little bit about The Prestige.
Yeah.
I think you can tell that the daughter knows what's going on.
Yeah.
some fundamental way, she knows who her father is.
Uh-huh.
But then inside the Dark Knight, it's Gordon's son who says like, why is he running away? Like he didn't do anything. Like this is not the appropriate
Ending.
response to the things that happened, right? And then I think it comes all the way around to maybe not all the way around, maybe he keeps doing this, but in Inception, where his kids are the only way that he can tell finally whether something is real or not, right? Whether he's in the dream world or whether he's in the real world.
Mm.
So for him, for Cobb, it's not the top. The top is his wife's anyway, right?
Yeah.
Which shouldn't be able to tell him anything, but
Right.
except that's really cool, right? But it's his totem is actually his kids.
Mm.
Right? Don't
Right. Some people
Never
say it's the
allowed.
wedding ring. Some people will say it's the
you're never allowed to see their. My view is that it's kids. You're never allowed to see their faces until the very end.
right.
You never see their faces until the very end, which is when the top is not important. to him.
When he's willing to walk away
He
from it.
walks away from the top. Right? It doesn't matter what the top is showing, because now he has the thing and it's also the thing that drove him to come out of the dream in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, his wife couldn't. Right? He was like, "What? But where?" She's like, "This is an amazing life we have." He's like, "Yeah, but where are the kids?
Mm-hmm.
This is not. This can't be where we end up, right?"
Right. Right. As superficially satisfying as it might be.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We have to let this dream world collapse into the sea. Yeah. Man, just a lot more to unpack there. What? Yeah. What are your general thoughts about the movies of Woody Allen?
So I guess I think Woody Allen has made one movie a lot of time. I mean, I haven't seen all of Woody Allen stuff, but it does.
But apparently you have, right?
Well, yeah. Well, maybe I haven't seen enough of them to make the claim that I just made, right? But
Right.
it feels like he is mostly making the same movie
Mm.
about himself.
Yeah.
Often so obviously about himself that he's actually playing himself.
Mm-hmm.
Then every now and then he'll make a movie where he's not the main character, in which case he needs like John Cusack to act exactly like him or something, right? But I think he's making movies about himself,
Ah,
grappling with himself. I don't know.
right. Well, write what you know.
Well, yeah, he's an odd guy, but it feels like I feel like he's always making the same.
Okay.
And so I felt like I had seen a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
Thought, I think I know what he's doing, and I didn't mind seeing the ones that I saw. I think Manhattan. I think Gordon Willis is the guy who shoots Manhattan. Right? Manhattan is beautiful.
Okay.
Spectacular black and white cinematography, great stuff. But it's kind of the same story.
Uh-huh.
Kind of the little, kind of whiny, fast talking Woody Allen character, and probably Diane Keaton probably in it, playing the person that Woody Allen's interested in. Like, they end up feeling a lot the same to me. Why?
Okay.
What about you? What were your thoughts?
I watched Rainy Day in New York and really liked it.
Uh-huh.
And then I watched Cafe Society and really disliked it. And I felt that the reasons I liked A Rainy Day in New York were because they were successful in executing the same things that they were not successful in executing
Interesting.
in Cafe Society.
Uh-huh.
I agree with you that you look at Jesse Eisenberg and you look at Timothy Chalamet and you're like, oh, both of them were told by their agent, or maybe Woody Allen himself, get in front of the camera and be Woody Allen.
Woody Allen,
right?
I'm pretty sure you're like, actually, I have about enough Woody Allen.
Right.
I'm maxed out on Woody Allen.
Right. And I think Timothy Chalamet and the rest of the cast pull that off, and you're like,
Mhm.
I'm interested in Timothy Chalamet's version of Woody Allen,
Uh-huh.
and I like the cast around him.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not interested in Jesse Eisenberg's version of Woody Allen, and the rest of the cast around him is just really strange.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like what are these people doing? Sort of the opposite of what you're talking about with Casablanca,
Yeah.
where you have one scene with in Casablanca, there's this great scene between Rick and his business manager. And it's like, all right, they've shut down the cafe. How long can we keep the staff paid?
Yep.
And how long can we keep operating? And the business manager has a conversation with him about that. And it's brief and it's very practical, but you feel like you know who this person is.
Yeah.
This is a guy who attends to the details. He knows his business. He knows the details,
He
but he's
also
also
wants to keep paying his people.
right.
the
But and he's
people.
deferential without being without just sort of bending down and being a toady of
Yeah.
Rick, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, I like this guy.
Yeah.
And he's in a 45-second scene,
Yep.
if that. Whereas when I watched Cafe Society, I was like, these people are weird, right?
Yeah.
It also doesn't help that the dialogue feels if it was written in the 2000s, but it's set in the 30s. And so they insert these names and these costumes that are supposed to be appropriate to the 30s, but it doesn't feel like these people live in the 30s.
Yeah.
Which,
So yeah,
yeah.
I guess yeah, so I haven't seen I haven't seen any of the more recent Woody Allen's. He hasn't felt to me like somebody like I needed to. I felt like he's in some ways when we're talking about having a conversation, right? I felt like he's saying the same thing over and over again, so I don't feel compelled to keep listening to the same thing over and over again, right? But in a way, I think he is in some ways writing what he knows, right? And he's kind of a bundle of idiosyncrasies.
Mm,
He's just a weird person.
mm,
And if you watch interviews, he seems like a weird person. And if you watch him acting in his movies, he seems like the same kind of weird person that's in his interviews.
mm.
And then eventually, although I don't know that it affects his art particularly, but eventually you discover that in his personal life, he's a very weird person.
Mm.
And it all gets kind of uncomfortable. Like, this is all just really weird, right? It's just kind of a bundle of idiosyncrasies. And it's not that easy to watch a bundle of idiosyncrasies for that long.
Right.
Without kind of getting worn out.
Right. And again, I think this is where I would repeat that I think Timothy Chalamet does a good job of
His
I'm gonna-
idiosyncrasies are a little more interesting.
I'm going to sort of put this into a package that you can more or less get behind.
Sure. You can see something that's not just idiosyncrasies.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I kind of like this guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I will say it does seem to me that generally speaking, Woody Allen is willing to poke fun at himself,
Sure.
which I do appreciate when when it is so obviously him.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I do.
I mean, I started, what was it, Midnight in Paris or something? I couldn't even get through it.
Yeah.
I got like a third of the way into it. And I was like, all right, I'm
Is
out.
Midnight in Paris, the one that's
It's Owen Wilson,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
like goes back in time every night
Van
to.
Gogh. Is that kind of the Van Gogh one? Is that about?
I think Van Gogh shows up.
I don't remember for sure, but
Okay, yeah, I couldn't get through it.
yeah.
But yeah.
Woody Allen.
Owen, yeah, I think that's Woody Allen
Yep.
as well.
Mhm.
But Owen Wilson also, Owen Wilson drives me
There's
nuts.
also a lot of idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, man, yeah, people are like, oh yeah, Owen Wilson, he's great. No,
But I mean, there was a time, before kind of, I think.
sorry, Owen Wilson. I'm sure you're fun to talk. Yeah, sure you're
Well,
fun in real life.
I think there was a time when before kind of people became more aware of Woody Allen's personal life, and when it felt like he was not quite making the same movie over again as much, where he was kind of he was a giant in the American kind of indie film
Yeah.
world, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a certain expiration date that people seem to have, right? Where you get to the point where you're like, yeah, I'm not sure that you have quite the same. I'm not sure you have quite the same drive to tell a story as you used to.
Mm.
It's not. I don't know that it's really. Maybe it has becoming a little more on the monetary side. I don't know.
Right, you're phoning it in. I do respect Tarantino for, by all accounts, saying that his 10th movie will be his last major theatrical release. I mean, he hasn't had the opportunity to go back on his word because movie 10 is his next one.
Yeah.
But he does, it seems that he has the correct instinct, is that there's a time when you just say, I have to be done, or else I'm going to get sort of
Yeah.
self-indulgent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. somebody like Woody Allen is maybe an extreme example of that, right? Because it felt like he was already kind of telling the same story over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So then you get to the point where like, I'm not quite sure what the 75-year-old Woody Allen is going to have to tell about that story that like, I'm just not sure where we're going, right? Some directors who are, I mean, I feel like there are a lot of kind of folks from that new Hollywood time
Mm-hmm.
who are old now, right? Spielberg is old.
Yeah.
And still making a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Was old and not still making a lot of movies, right? And
Who?
they're Coppola.
Oh yeah.
And they don't seem great, right? But then you have, I mean, Mad Max Fury Road, like George Miller's what, 70, 78-year-old old or something?
Yeah. Something.
And make an action movie like Fury Road at that age is crazy to me. Like, what is
Yeah.
what's he doing?
Right. How did he? Yeah. Yeah. How did he be like, yeah, then we're gonna have a guy bouncing
So
around on
sometimes you
cables, and every time he hits the D string, there's gonna be a flame coming out the end of the guitar. I mean, it is. It is bananas.
So I mean, I guess it seems to me some of that can still happen, right? But there's also kind of an interesting, eras are interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to me.
No.
I tend to find myself liking a lot of them. Like I like silent movies. I
Mhm.
like classic movies. I like the new Hollywood stuff. In some ways, I like the new Hollywood stuff less than the classic movies. But then I like a lot of contemporary stuff too, right? It
Mm.
feels like there's more access to people that are making more interesting movies in some way. Not necessarily like we were talking about at the beginning, out of Hollywood, right? I think Hollywood is paint by number, right? But there's a ton of interesting Iranian movies. There's stuff that the Danish people are making. Really, like that's just not nobody would have had access. And I'm not even sure they were making stuff, particularly in the 30s and 40s, but nobody had access to that stuff before.
Sure.
Now you can find a bunch of that stuff, right? So it feels like, yeah, I don't love most of what Hollywood's doing,
Mm-hmm.
but these people over here are making a movie because they really are trying to make an art form of. They're trying to make it work.
They're trying to carve in time.
They're not thinking this is going to make me $600 million, right? That's not what they're trying to do.
Mm.
So I think that kind of, in some ways, to get back to your original question, right? Bad movies are made because people aren't. Seems simplistic. Bad movies are made because people aren't trying to make good ones. Right? That's how you end up. You end up with a bad movie because you're not trying to make a thing. You're trying to make money.
Right.
You're trying to be successful. And when you do that, it's going to flatten things or make things paint by number or make things boring or bad.
Mm.
Right. People who are not trying to make money, but kind of think of the medium as a kind of collaborative and insightful and something that has a way for them to capture something and say something interesting to people that can watch it. Those are the things that make good movies, right? Now, sometimes those are not good either. It's not, again, it's not as though just wanting to make a movie makes it a good movie.
Right. Yeah. Right. You were telling me, and this is going back years, you're telling me this anecdote about I want to say it was a director who was very successful, went to a bunch of young filmmakers and said, all right, I'm going to divide you into teams and I'm going to give each of you guys one very harsh limit. You guys,
Obstructions.
okay. Yeah. Like, okay. So yeah, could you reiterate that,
Sure.
that anecdote?
So there was a relative. So this is Lars von Trier.
Lars von Trier
was part of the it's called the Dogma 95. So he decided that movies were all fake. Like everything was fake. Nothing was real anymore. We had to get back to the kind of the basics. So he thought that cinema, using that word is kind of esoterically, like cinema was not sincere anymore. It didn't have it.
We're making too many movies.
Everybody was making.
We need to get back to film.
Right. Yeah. So what he said was he started a whole movement, he and other filmmakers with him. And they said, oh, here's our list of things we're not going to have. We're not going to have artificial light. We're not going to have music unless it's obviously created by something in the shot. Like, so there's no background, there's no theme
Soundtrack.
music. Right. Yeah. So you can have music if there's a radio, that's fine, but you have to have like a way that people can tell that the music is existing in the shot. We're not going to. So he had this whole list of things. Mostly what it meant is that the movies that they made were ugly. In fact, like they just were not nice to look at.
Right.
But the premise for him was everything has become fake.
Okay.
And there was a director that had been very influential on him, who had made a short movie,
Mm-hmm.
a short film. And Lars von Trier went to him and said, I want you to make this again, but each movie is going to have a different obstruction or a different limitation.
Okay.
So you're making the same movie, but it's animated. Or
Yep.
you're making the same movie, but you can't do this. Or you're making the same movie, but you can't do that, right? And they're all interesting. And then the last one, he said, here's all the money you want and do whatever you want. And it's awful, right? There are no obstructions. There are no limits. There's nothing that makes you, that kind of compels you to be creative,
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to get around something.
Mm.
Right? But yeah, I remember that. So the Five Obstructions is a documentary
Okay.
about this process, and it includes all of the shorts in it.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Do you remember some of the other limitations?
So I remember one of them is animated.
Okay.
I don't remember the other limitations.
Okay.
So there are 4 with obstructions and then
With none.
with none.
And the last one is
Can't
just
remember.
like, oh my,
It
what am
was
I
awful.
watching?
It was awful. And the guy who made it recognized that.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, the problem is that this one was, there was nothing kind of to be overcome here.
I didn't have to work.
Yeah, there was nothing, it was easy, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't end up as anything, right?
Right. Right.
Ah, it's really interesting that you remember that. It's been years since I thought about that movie.
Okay. So
Remember,
Lars
I
von
got
Trier.
that. So I got that from this great video store in Ventura
Uh-huh.
called Salzer's. It's an amazing video store. I don't know if it exists anymore,
Mm.
but I remember going there. This was kind of in my cinematic self-education days, right?
Sure.
Or I call it a bootstrap cinephile, right? Kind of make your pull yourself into your own into your own love
Right,
of cinema, right?
right.
And I used to go down here. This is also when I was going on film school, so was not. In fact, nobody pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps. But I used to go to this video store and get stuff that now you can get some of it if you get the Criterion Collection channel. You can find some of these things,
Okay.
but a lot of them are still things that are hard to watch. I remember Man with a Movie Camera, which is a Russian made by a guy who his actual birth name was Kaufman, but he changed his name to Dziga Vertov, which is kind of in the communist, like 1919 maybe, I think is when this might have been made.
Ah.
And it's about a guy who, it's a documentary basically.
Yeah.
It's kind of he goes around Moscow just filming interesting things and doing like weird in-camera tricks and all these kind of, it's a wild thing. Really interesting, silent. And you couldn't get it anywhere except this one. I was able to get it at Salzer's. It was on a VHS tape, right? They had this, there's no way. I mean, I think it's like looking at a library card, right? I could see the last person who had checked it out. And I mean, it was 10 years ago or something, right? No, nobody had got that. And they just keep it there. Right?
Yep.
It was this huge old building. You could go in there and find all kinds of crazy stuff, which some of them you still can't get on. It's not readily available on streaming, or you can't buy because nobody's put it on DVD in years or something, right? Yeah, it was a fabulous store.
Salzers.
Yeah, Salzer's.
Huh.
I don't even know if it's around anymore. I hope it is.
Yeah. One thing I've been curious about for a long time is the mid-budget movie. It's not a blockbuster. It's not expected to make the returns of a blockbuster.
Sure.
So I'm thinking of like Contact with Jodie Foster, or Lebanon with John Hamm, or that Winter's Bone is probably, that was probably more on the side of indie.
Probably more an indie.
But
yeah.
but even maybe Silver Linings Playbook.
Sure.
Right.
Something that's kind of getting squeezed out.
Yeah.
It's a little middle right now.
Right. So how did the middle produce profits at one time? Why is it being squeezed out now? And could it come back?
Sure. I don't know. I probably,
Because I remember
I don't know
seeing,
that I have much of a kind of historical insight into that. I have opinions, I think, probably, but it feels like so a couple of things I think have happened. The amount of profit that studios want, I think, has changed.
okay.
So for example, if you say, hey, you could make I don't know, 3 or 4 Silver Linings playbooks. Say it costs $50 million. I don't know what that costs. I mean, the actors are more expensive than they used to be, so that's part of it, I think. But let's say it costs $50 million. Let's make 4 of these. It's going to cost us $200 million. Let's say they all each one makes $75 million. So you're making $100 million profit. You spend 200 million, you get 100 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we can spend $200 million, well, probably $300 million on a Marvel movie, and it will make more than $100 million worth of profit. It might not
Right.
be any good, but you'll just,
Right, but if it
you'll
makes-
just fall into $400 million worth of profit by releasing it in China. Like it's just, it's gonna make a bunch more money. At some point, that is kind of what's driving it, which is, well, let's say you make Silver Linings, let's say you make 4 of them, and 2 of them make $75 million, and 2 of them make $30 million, right? Whereas I'm going to fall into $400 million in China if I make a Marvel movie. So why should I take any risk
Mm.
on a middle, right? Whereas you still have people that will make a horror movie for $3 million and it'll make $280 million, right? So the profit margins on the low side are, it doesn't cost anything to make this. And if it hits,
You're talking like The Purge.
yeah,
That was,
it's gonna
I
be
think, the
massive. Well, Blair Witch Project or something, right?
right.
I mean, it's a movie that makes you sick to watch because the camera isn't like that, right? But that cost nothing and made huge amounts of money.
Right.
Now, should it have? I don't know. We don't have to get into that. But so what you can do is you can say, well, we can either spend a lot of money on something which is not a risk.
Yep.
And I think is where you see the economics of it, right? We can spend a lot of money on something that's not a risk because
A Michael Bay movie, even if it's in China and Japan and the Asian market, will basically get it past the 700 million mark, no problem.
so as long as you spend enough money on marketing,
Uh-huh.
right, which is also an expense that movies or mid-budget movies don't really have. So
Mhm.
let's say, hey, if you make a $200 million Marvel movie, you're going to spend, I don't know, $100 million on marketing it. And it's going to be in everybody's face for a month. And then you, because of the arrangement you have with the movie theaters, are going to get all of the ticket money for the first 3 weeks, and you're going to totally saturate all the theaters with this movie. It's going to be on every screen in the multiplex. You'll make all of that money, and then people will stop watching it because it's actually not that good, and they've gotten oversaturated, and it's done. And then the theaters won't make any money because they get all the ticket sales later on, but nobody's going to watch that movie in week 4, right? So I think the studios are just eliminating as much risk as they can, right? It's an idea. It's not an original property. It's a sequel, I don't know, number 250. We know that people have gone to see 249 of them already. There is no reason to think that 250 is the straw that breaks the camel's back. I mean, the camel should be dead by now. It's not. So keep making it, right? There's almost they're eliminating as much risk as they can, right? So if they're going to spend money, they want to spend it on something that they know is going to make them money. If they spend nothing on a horror film and it makes money, sweet. If they spend a lot, they want it to be on something that they know is going to make money.
Mm.
And I think the mid stuff is where you get, on the one hand, you get movies that really can be pretty good,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not going to make a ton of money, except for in rare instances. You're not going to have a movie that makes a ton of money in the middle because you're not going to market it that much, and it's probably not going to have costs. You're not going to have the budget doesn't come from special effects. It's not a huge action movie. It's not the kind of thing that's driving advertising or driving people to the theater, right? So you've kind of has a limited ceiling
Mm-hmm.
and kind of all of the risk in a way, right?
Right.
It's not free like a horror movie is. So if you make a horror movie for $1 million and it makes $1 million or it makes nothing, big deal. It's for a studio, $1 million is just not that much, right? But if you
Worth a
make something,
shot. Yeah.
if you make something for $50 million and it doesn't make any money, that hurts a lot. So let's take that $50 million and just put 4 of those movies together and not greenlight them and make one of these, right?
Mhm.
I think that's so. In a lot of ways, I think it's the studios that have done that in a way, right?
Right.
And the streaming service has, in some cases, helped and in some cases exacerbated. Like I don't even know why Netflix is spending money on some of the stuff they're spending money on.
Oh yeah, it's true. How do they? Yeah.
I don't think they have a profit.
I've heard that for
I don't think
yeah,
they
I've
have
heard that
had
for
a profit
years.
yet.
Like
Yeah.
they're somehow still around. No one wants to get rid of them. They're a cultural icon now, right? Like, I mean,
Well, I can remember. So the,
Yeah, Netflix.
Netflix.
Binging.
Netflix binging,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Netflix and chill.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. Well, I can remember. So they've kind of been two cultural things, in fact, because you guys may not remember this as much, but those envelopes
Mm-hmm.
for a little while were everywhere. Like everybody was getting those Netflix envelopes
Right.
all the time.
Right.
And that was actually the profitable business, and then they shut that down.
Yep.
To switch to streaming.
Right. Well, and partially I think what they're trying to do with streaming is they're trying to do something. I don't know if this is true or not. So I'm guessing, right? I think they're trying to do what studios spent literally 100 years doing, right? Which is to build a library.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to build their own library right now by paying for people to make things, right? So that then they can have their own library. And now they don't have to pay anybody for their library because it's theirs. They own it, right? So they don't have to they have to spend money right now to end up with this movie.
Yep.
But in 10 years, if people like it, I don't know, Stranger Things. Stranger Things is probably the best example. Like Stranger Things is very successful.
Yep.
In 10 years, if people still like Stranger Things, maybe they will, maybe they won't. If they do, Netflix won't have to pay anything to show people Stranger Things. It'll be free for them, right? They'll have spent all that money at the beginning,
Ah.
right? Whereas if they want to get somebody else's movie onto this service, they have to pay for it, right? So they're trying to build a library.
Right.
It's just for most studios, they spent years doing it. Years and years and years and decades doing that.
Yep.
Right? Almost centuries, right?
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. I don't understand the Netflix phenomenon. I don't understand. I mean, every now and then I see something that I like, but mostly I say, I don't know how stuff gets greenlit. I don't know how it gets shut down. It doesn't look to me like it's based on what people like or not, because a bunch of this stuff is just lousy. So I don't know what to make of it. But yeah.
I looked up. Salzers is still in business.
Is it really?
Yeah,
That's awesome. Good for them.
52 years.
That is the way it should be.
Yeah. So
There needs to be places like Salzers, right?
Yeah.
That's also the reason I like the Criterion Collection,
Yeah.
because you can get to movies that way that you can't get any other way. They were, I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Ted Joya. I think it was Ted Joya, Dana Joya's brother.
Okay.
He's great.
Yeah.
He has a Substack, which is very popular. He was a jazz musician, but he writes stuff about culture all the time, right? And he was talking about how much kind of physical media is lost. And film is kind of an extreme version of this, right? Because the actual physical medium is very breaks down right away. Right?
Mhm.
So it's hard to preserve things on film. It's not designed to be hundreds of years old, right? So they have this, Martin Scorsese, has built this whole place where you're kind of storing this film. You have to keep the temperature very, very particular and stuff. And even then, what happens is you'll eventually get it out, and the mercury halides, the stuff that makes the actual image is just gone. Like it just comes off,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It comes off the
The real.
since kind of the actual film, right?
Mhm.
So there are certain things that they've digitized so you can stream them, right? But there's a lot of stuff from early Hollywood or even mid Hollywood, which is just actually gone. Like you actually lost it. So that people will reference movies in newspapers in the 30s or something, right? And we don't actually have examples. We don't actually have it anymore. Right?
Wow.
So that the actually, and even the stuff that we do have, the studios are not putting on TV. There's not a lot of demand. Like, sure, there might be 10 of us that want to watch this thing, not a million, right? So they're not making DVDs of it. No streaming service is calling for it or something, right? So that there are a lot of these movies that are just not available anymore. And they may never be available again. Like they might just never get put on a streaming service. They might never get another DVD burned.
Wow.
And then at some point, somebody will open that door and all the images will just go away, right? So there's something very short-lived about a lot of that old stuff, which is very strange to think about. That's why Salzers, like Salzers is important, right? Anyway, it's a weird phenomenon, and now we're watching stuff on phones or watching things that are 2 seconds long, or like it's just even that kind of idea of kind of getting people to sit down and watch this thing together. There's just a bunch of people that just don't do something like that. Just don't do that because that's not the way they think of watching things. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was very interesting to grow up and I would say come of age when prestige TV was on the rise.
Yeah.
You did see this weird middle ground where things things that really didn't fit into that 2 hour
Yep.
time slot.
Mhm.
You could actually tell those stories
Yeah.
now. But then you saw the dark side of that, which is things that really should have been 90 minutes had to get stretched out over 8 hours.
Yep.
And right, you're sitting there and being like, oh, they're going to
This would have been
drag
a great
this
movie.
conversation.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. How are they going to stretch this into a 30-minute episode? Well, they find a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think, at the same time, not to be too much of a, sentimentalist, because Flannery hates those, right?
Mm.
There's still, so about my favorite TV show in recent memory, maybe even ever, is Fargo, which is very recent,
Oh,
which is a fabulous TV show.
really? Oh, okay. I haven't checked it out.
Well, I love it. I
Okay.
think it's amazing.
Okay.
I think it is significantly better than
Okay.
that's kind of gives it its, I don't know, kind of its artistic shape. It's really not. It's not a remake of the movie or even really an extension of the movie. But it's a great TV show. I think the last season of it came out just last year.
Okay.
Right? So I think there still is stuff like that. It's just, I do think kind of the overall conversation, like, I think when you're making something because you want it to make money, it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean a good thing can't happen, but it does complicate the decisions you make. And it makes it hard. It makes it hard to make the right decisions, I think, often. Like, oh, should we do this or do this? I don't know. Is Robert Downey the right person for this? No, except for Robert Downey Jr. in here, then people are going to watch it. Okay, well, then put him in there. Right. So, I mean, I like Robert Downey Jr., but I think when a lot of what's driving it, and I think this is partially because a lot of young people look at directors and actors and think, wow, this is amazing. Like, these people are famous. Like, actors are a completely different thing now than they were 50 years ago. Like, they're institutions almost. I mean, Brad Pitt is just an institution. Like, I'm not even sure he's a person at this point.
He's been subsumed. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's been annihilated.
Yeah. Right. But so so a lot of the things, and I think then people look at that and they say, oh, it's a business.
Uh-huh.
It's not an art form. I mean, it can be, but it's a business. Is what it is, right? Especially in America, I think that's the case. And so then you end up with people who are making business decisions. That's not usually the way I think you end up with good art. That's why they kind of talk about like artists being poor and starving and stuff like that. When you get really good art, when people have the obstructions, like when you have all these things you're trying to overcome, that's when you get good art. Not when what you're trying to do is decide how to make the most money. Like, that's not the motivation that you want, right? So I think that kind of happens. That clouds stuff for us, which is why I think foreign cinema is encouraging. Like, oh, those people are. But in Iran, they're making movies running around trying not to get arrested. Like, those people really want to make movies. Like, I probably would not make a thing that might get me arrested if I get caught. Like, I probably wouldn't do that. I'm not, that's an obstruction I'm not interested in, right?
Right.
But they're doing that. So what they're doing is way more alive. Like, they're not making decisions based on whether it's going to make money or not, right?
Right. They're doing one takes because they were running from the cops. They're like, well,
running away.
yeah, I'll keep the camera rolling. This will be interesting.
In some ways, it's like the new Hollywood, like people making indie films in the 70s or 80s. Like, that's kind of what they're doing. Like, they're running around. Nobody has permits. They're just like, we got to get like the Griffith Observatory behind this shot and then get out of here because otherwise we're going to big trouble. So it feels like when those people are doing that, they're doing that because they want to, not because they think it's economically or that it's the way they'll end up with the most money or something, right?
Right.
I don't think that's just true of film. That's true of probably any kind of art, right? If you decide this is the way for me to make the most money,
I don't know.
you end up being Thomas King.
Thomas Kincaid.
Like, wow, there's a lot of money there.
Not any of my money, I'll tell you that.
Connor's, like, that is the sentimentality at
its finest.
Finest / worst, right?
Yes. Yes.
Wow, I don't even, like, you look at a Thomas Kincaid painting, you're like, I'm not even sure where that light comes from. Like, there's no
Directionality
way for that to happen.
Yeah. Right. but he's in books, he's on pillows, he's puzzles. I mean, it's right. I mean, how, yeah. And that's kind of discouraging and disturbing is that there is such a market for that. Like, man, how did, how did that become the most commercially successful product? Thomas Kincaid? I mean, anyone with a semester's worth of art appreciation
Sure.
can look at that and be like, that
Well, I mean,
is
yeah, because it's easy.
it's
Because it's not that art has to be challenging. Like I don't think art is necessarily its purpose is not necessarily to be challenging, right?
no, that's
But
true, but it should be saying
right,
something and
and
not just smiling at you like a
right, it's
like a
Thomas
brain.
Kincaid is the equivalent of the Marvel movies, right?
Mm,
It's safe. He knows it's going to make money. It doesn't really. He doesn't have to take any kind of a risk,
mm,
right, in order to be successful. He doesn't have to. And in fact, in some ways, what he has to do is take fewer risks. He's kind of backed himself into the situation where anything that's a risk is going to make him less money, right?
right.
He's in the perfect, like, why would he take, I think you end up the same thing with the studios. Like, why would we take a risk? On the other hand, you still end up with terrible Star Wars TV shows. So apparently you can still figure out a way to mess up even the things that seem like they're sure to
Right,
succeed.
right, right. You can set out to make money
And still
do,
fail.
and
Yeah.
do worse than average.
Yep.
Yeah. And make right. That people who are looking to be entertained are still upset.
Yeah.
Like I'm not even
I'm
entertained.
not even entertained by this.
Right. Right.
Like, I don't even know what's going on in this story anymore. It makes no sense.
Yeah. Neither do you. Right. Neither do the writers.
Right.
Yeah. The writers don't know. Oh yeah. Push me in front of a bus. Yeah. Oh, it's so frustrating. Oh. I love the first season of True Detective.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So True Detective. So the first season of True Detective is one of the things I talked about in one of the few times people, other than this, one of the few times people actually voluntarily asked me to talk about movies. um, so it was there that kind of I had the idea of the brutality of grace, right? Or I think that especially that kind of that monologue at the very end with McConaughey's character, right, where he says that he thinks the light is winning, right? Like I think there's a lot of that in that show.
Yeah.
At least in that first season. The second season was just weird.
I never saw it.
I haven't gone back since then, but
No.
I only watched a couple episodes of the second season and then thought, wait, I liked where it ended up. So I think maybe it's just going to get worse. I think I should probably stop. Why'd you bring up True Detective?
Oh, it just seemed to me to be a true example of where the new medium succeeded, right? Where we're not trying to make Friends, we're not trying to make Seinfeld, we're not trying to make Frasier, right? We're not trying to make something that people can tune into and chuckle at in between enduring commercials, right? Um, this isn't this is meant to be challenging. This is meant to be talked about, and it is not supposed to be a 2 hour movie, right? Like if you try to take True Detective season 1 and boil it down to 2 hours, you could actually probably do it, right? But it wouldn't, but you'd be missing something,
Yeah.
right? You might still come up with something very worthwhile to engage in. But the fact that it does have a full 8 hours to do what it sets out to do is a blessing for that story. And so it seemed to be the best example. I haven't seen Fargo
Yeah.
of
Fargo is similar in a lot of ways. So they're like 10 episodes instead of 23 or like kind of the standard. So it's much more kind of in the British model where the seasons are like 10, 12 episodes instead of the American was like 23 episodes.
Oh, really?
Just a lot of television. There's less of that now.
Yeah.
But
Right. I remember one of my relatives. I mean, they loved How I Met Your Mother, and then Friends. Obviously, was more '90s, but then even The Office. I mean, I'm not saying I have never laughed at some moments in The Office, but that whole approach to television just made me generally roll my eyes.
So kind of talking about the sincerity of things, or like Lars von Trier being upset because nobody's telling true stories anymore, whatever. Right?
Yeah, White Collar.
I don't tend to like comedy because it feels because I see the strings too much. I feel
Uh-huh.
like it's setting me up for things. And I
Mhm.
can see that it's setting me up for things too much.
Mhm.
So I don't tend to like comedy stuff for that reason because it feels, although I think the British version of The Office
Mm,
is on the one hand not very funny. It's mostly sad,
mm,
but that was much more effective.
mhm.
But I don't think it was trying to be funny, particularly the same way. It's Ricky Gervais, and he's
Yeah.
kind of an odd.
I mean, to give the speech that he gave out, was it the Oscars or was it the Golden Globes?
I think it was the Golden Globe.
Was it when he just lambasted the audience? You can't do that if you're just a normal, regular guy, right?
Yeah,
Right.
almost none of those people are normal. I think.
Yeah. Right. I mean, going after, what was the news? Jeffrey Epstein died. There's sort of silence, and he's like, "Oh, come on, you can." I know he was your friend. Yeah. Oh, it's wild. Well,
He's a very prickly guy.
yeah.
Yeah.
After we'll show it to you, Tom. It's something else. Yeah. So, well, Joseph, thanks so much.
No, my pleasure. It was
I'm
awesome.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but we are not out of topics of
We have
conversation.
not yet discussed all of the movies,
Right.
just like we have not watched all of the movies yet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I can only say we'll just wait until we can have you back on and continue a great conversation. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure.
Yeah. Good to have you.